Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So this is part 4 of our video examining debate, Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? Bart Ehrman versus Jonathan Sheffield. So we've gone through Jonathan Sheffield's opening statements, and we are in the summary part of Bart Ehrman's, I think I said Bart Ehrman, Jonathan Sheffield's opening statements. We are in halfway through Bart Ehrman's opening statements, and we are basically entering into a time where he's sort of summarizing everything. And this is his opening, so it's not a rebuttal of Jonathan Sheffield. Jonathan Sheffield is a Textus Receptus advocate, so he advocates for the TR that historically in the Reformation period the Christians used. The critical text has come about mostly through the work of Westcott and Hort, and so people like Bart Ehrman and many other skeptics, they follow the critical text. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is the Bible Society is pretty much everything that has historical links back 100, 200, 300 years has been co-opted, and now they use the critical text, which is unfortunate. We here in this group, I guess it's just me sitting here, but in the Textus Receptus Academy, there are lots of people who are confessional bibliologists. We usually just get labeled King James only, and that's usually just it's a bit like saying you're a racist, sort of thing. It's like, oh, okay, you don't really want to deal with the details. You just want to practice ad hominem argumentation. But Bart Ehrman, he is part of the academy. He is still a very strong influence in the academy. He has been for many years. And he seems to be raising up a team of atheists, agnostics, who can sort of parrot his material. And they all seem to be on board with following the critical text, which is quite amazing because it shows that they are not thinking for themselves. They will use all of Bart Ehrman's arguments, but then in other areas, they'll think for themselves. Like some of them will even say, I don't even think Jesus existed, or Paul didn't even exist, or what. They'll say whatever. Like say someone like Derek from Myth Vision, or CJ Cornthwaite. There's many of these people around today. And Bart Ehrman promotes a lot of these people, Dan McClellan. And some of them will have original thoughts on certain things. But when it comes to the text, they are all critical text advocates. Now, when I say critical text advocates, what they will do is they will use the usual bog standard sort of Bruce Metzger critical text argumentation for, say like the last 12 verses of Mark, where 12 complete verses are missing. 1,654 manuscripts have the last 12 verses of Mark in it. Pretty much everything has it. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't. Now, Textus Receptus people are very sus on these two manuscripts. Now, Bart Ehrman, he's part of the academy, so he's already up to his neck in this type of teaching, and so he's not going to move from that quickly. But his followers should really be free-thinking people. Why haven't they actually come to maybe a majority text position on this, or a Byzantine priority position, or Aramaic primacy? Like they're not thinking for themselves, or create their own type of narrative, or their own type of textual criticism. But they are just parroting what Bart Ehrman says, because Bart Ehrman is the guru. He's the go-to guru. And so this is scholasticism. And what I find is they usually use terms like, peer-reviewed. Yeah, peer-reviewed by who? Oftentimes, we went through this last time about stacking the board. What can happen is you can get an institution, and you can get a whole bunch of people come on board in that institution who have a certain ideal, and they eventually take over the board, and then they vote on things and they stack the board. So this is what's happened in much of Christianity. And this is actually the pattern of most good establishments. We see this in politics. We see groups rise up that are like, hey, we've got a pure agenda. We just want to follow the Constitution and have limited government and all this sort of stuff. And I mean, George Bush used to say that. Trump, sort of basically won an election sort of saying he was going to do that sort of thing. And so we see that things can start really, really well, but then they tend to decline. And we see this, say, with what was it? The Methodist Church became corrupt, but they had broken away from the Church of England. And then after they become corrupt, like the Salvation Army, William Booth, he starts his thing, but now they're so corrupt. Other groups have come out of them. People can't hang around them because Scripture says to depart from those who are doing things contrary to Scripture. So the thing is, there's usually a decline. Things can start off really well, but see, this is the problem with just jumping on the bandwagon. Just because they've been good in the past doesn't guarantee it's going to be good in the future. And so some people will jump onto a political bandwagon and they'll carry that banner all the way through until they're gassing people. You know what I mean? Like it just until it gets that bad, then they're like, well, maybe I was wrong. Where we should really be looking for warning signs, especially us Christians, about denominationalism. Is a denomination, has it started out as a really good, organic, healthy movement that's in decline, or the people are becoming just like the group that they left because everyone was off the wall and heretical and they're all devils. And so this is the thing with the academy. The academy has become corrupted, and they're usually hanging on to these, like say the Bible societies. The Bible societies they're just bringing out their 6th edition, the United Bible Society Greek text. Their 6th edition has just come out, and the issue is, well, what was the United Bible Societies? Well, in 1804, the Bible Society started. People like William Wilberforce, he was instrumental in stopping slavery and things like that. Good guy. He wanted to start the Bible societies, and so a lot of people were involved with that. And before that, there were a lot of other little Bible societies, but most of those have all been gobbled up now in the bigger one. But initially, it was a good idea, and the whole thing was there was some Irish girl who had to walk like 30 miles to go and get a Bible. And she had to pay like a whole bunch of money for it that she didn't really have. And so she had to save up for years, like just to get the scriptures. So this story was like the main push behind the British and foreign Bible societies. But they used the Textus Receptus. That's the first thing that they used, because it was the only thing around. There wasn't any competitor. It's either you use that or you use the Catholic Bible, sort of thing. And so what happened was 1804, it starts. Now they start doing a whole bunch of foreign Bibles as well, which is great. But what happened was they didn't really have a strong constitution or, statement of beliefs and things like that. So by 1831, a whole bunch of Trinitarians left the Bible societies because there were so many Unitarians, like Jehovah's Witness types, in the Bible Society at that time. So they left and formed the Trinitarian Bible Society. So the Trinitarian Bible Society, Jeff Riddle's been strong with that group, and I'm really glad because I remember D.A. Waite warning everyone about the Trinitarian Bible Society. I think it was Andrew Brown was like the president or whatever you call it, the leader. And he basically became a majority text guy and was coming against the TR. And so it caused a lot of problems, but they seem to be, way better now. They're well on track to being a proper TR group. Now, they do say there's mistakes in the King James Bible. I just pointed out and just asked them where exactly. But anyway, so what happened was in 1831, they formed the Trinitarian Bible Society. So now you got 2 Bible societies. What would you call the former one? Probably the Unitarian Bible Society. And so that's 50 years before Westcott and Hort. A whole bunch of Unitarians rise up, Ezra Abbott, George Van Smith, a whole bunch of a whole bunch of scholars. Wiener, he was a Unitarian, and a lot of people favored Unitarianism. So they're questioning any verse that has to do anything has anything to do with the Trinity. They're questioning it. Anything to do with the deity of Christ, they're questioning it. And so by the time Westcott and Hort come around, they're saturated to the back teeth with all this Unitarian rubbish, and they had Unitarians help them with their Greek text as well. Like George Van Smith, he helped. And so he was one of the main guys on the committee. So they have a basically, I call it the Unitarian text. And so here you have now today Trinitarians trying to defend a text that is basically like a Unitarian type of thing. And so, but you can see this this progression starts off really good, but then it just declines, you know. And now some groups have been around for a long time, and they can start off good, they can go into decline, then they can have revival and go back down, and then they can revive again, and that can happen as well. I'm not saying every single church or every single group just goes down, but it does tend to be the pattern. Usually something starts off really good, and it's like it's hard to keep that momentum. It's hard to keep everyone pure, and they're I mean, you look at, say, even the early church in the book of Acts, like they're not even caring about money. They're just selling blocks of land and giving it to the disciples and saying, look, go and preach and do this and do it, like just funding the whole ministry and everything. But then, you know, Ananias and Sapphira, obviously that's an interesting example. And that's in the New Testament. They got struck dead. It's so heavy. It's not like Old Testament stuff. I often point that out to the Word of Faith guys, you know, who are like, you know, God wouldn't do that anymore. It's the age of grace. And it's like Ananias and Sapphira, God pretty much struck them down. You know, they died. But yeah, so anyway, but then you look at the churches, like there's growth, but at the same time, you've got, say, like the church in Corinth, like Paul's lamenting that they've exploded in truth and lots of people coming in and all the rest of it. But then they're gloating about some guy sleeping with his stepmother, and they've got all these problems, and it just tends to be a decline. And so I guess that's why Paul wrote so much to these churches. He's trying to get them to just get back on track and you know, not decline, because that just seems to be the natural thing. And I think that's like with anything in life. Maintenance is the big problem. And so you can buy a massive mansion. Who's going to mow the lawns? Who's going to paint the place? Who's going to, you know, every 10 years you need a paint job. Who's going to replace all the tiling after, you know, 20 years when they start cracking? And you know, maintenance is a huge thing. And sometimes that can be the most tiring thing, because you don't feel like you're getting anything new. When you create something new, it's like, oh, here we are, we've got a new place. But you got to maintain it, and that's a really hard thing to do. It takes patience, it takes a lot of courage, and so what we see in the academy is it is constantly being degraded. And now it's to the point now where they have Mormons in the academy. They've already had Jesuits, they've had Unitarians. So why not get a Jehovah's Witnesses? Why not get them involved? You know. But they do have Mormons involved. They have Jesuits involved in the text, and so the thing's just gone right down to the gutter, and to the point where, you know, the New Revised Standard Version by Jennifer Knust, like she's obviously, a big promoter of the LBGT community and doctrine, and Ahana says you. Discussing entropy. I might put these comments on the stage, actually, because I did like doing that yesterday. There we go. So we can read all the comments. Just entropy, I guess, is the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is just constantly in a state of decay, and we have to fight against that. And but that's where I guess sometimes too I find that we can be pointing out this entropy, but we're not actually proactive in Textus Receptus issues. Now, up until probably about 2016, I was mostly involved in proactive Textus Receptus things. Whenever someone's doing a Bible translation, I'm trying to help, trying to work out definitions of words so people could, it could dispel the fog over those type of things. But what I find, I've changed gear and I'm sort of in, I guess it's a defense mode. And it is, I have jumped into a reactionary mode where people are saying all sorts of, weird and strange things, and I'm popping my head up saying, no, I think that's wrong. But I think it is good to have positive, proactive Textus Receptus, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess projects, or like say there's a guy in Uganda at the moment. Now, some of you guys know who I'm talking about. I don't really want to mention his name because he has had lots of persecution there from a certain group that we all know about, who are mostly in the Middle East. But they're doing a Bible translation into that language. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this guy on everything. We've gone at loggerheads on some things, but I do take my hat off to a guy who's got his whole family there in the middle of Africa. They've had a lot of issues, a lot of problems, but they're still doing that work. And I think it's sort of like when you look at the original Bible societies, how they started, like that type of work was amazing. And I think to have people really support that, and not only support it like financially and all the rest of it, but to actually sort of come alongside and say, hey, look, you're doing this version. Maybe I could, do an interlinear for you, a Greek interlinear, but I'll base it off the Greek, the Scrivener text that you're using, and we can create that. It wouldn't be that hard for someone to do that, to come alongside and help. And like, even I've often thought of, people like Jeff Riddle, people who, like the Van Cleeks. We don't see eye to eye on everything. I don't see eye to eye with Jeff Riddle on eschatology or the Van Cleeks. I was debating with Van Cleek Senior about Donald Trump the other day, because a lot of the MAGA guys are like, what's going on? What are we doing? I thought we were against war and all this sort of stuff. And so it seems like people feel like they're being scammed again, like the George Bush sort of thing. So anyway, we've been chatting about that, and, a few ideas, exchanged. And the thing is too, it just depends on what your algorithm is. And my algorithm is constantly showing libertarian stuff. So it's showing like, hey, Democrats are dumb and Republicans are dumb, or just showing all the problems, But that doesn't mean it's proactive either, because you can just point out all the problems, but it doesn't mean you're doing anything positive for the world or for the community. So anyway, people like the Van Cleeks, people like Jeff Riddle, there's lots of people who could be supported, and some of their projects helped. Even just having someone proofread stuff. I remember when I wrote my Revelation 16:5 book, just having a friend of mine, Henry, go through and proofread it, because I was just so strapped for time. I was just coming home exhausted from work and just going through this stuff until late at night, and it's complicated stuff, and like there's mistakes in that book. Like I think I say, instead of astronomy, I've got astrology. The King James guys followed, or they had books on astrology. I'm like, that's a pretty big mistake to make. But I excuse myself because I know how busy I was. But just to have people come along and proofread stuff and say, look, you should word it this way or that way. I guess, even ChatGPT is really good at proofreading stuff. But yeah, so where am I going with all this? We're talking about Bart Ehrman, we're talking about the Academy. And so these guys have an air that they are still just carrying on the banner of, we've been in the Academy. We're talking about the critical text. We're talking about, the lineage from Metzger that goes all the way back through Nestle, that goes back to Westcott and Hort, that goes back to, thinkers like Semler and Griesbach and these other guys. We're just carrying on that banner. And most of these guys will call themselves Reformed, who are in the critical text camp. Mark Ward, he would say he's Reformed. James White, Dan Wallace, all of these guys say they're Reformed. Well, it just seems so strange that they use these labels, like, "Hey, I'm Reformed," but they don't use the Reformed text. They mock it. So it's sort of like saying, "Hey, I'm a vegetarian," but you're there eating meat, and it's like, when did that enter into this tradition that you have? When did having the critical text come into the picture? You should be following the Reformation, so it is quite strange. And they'll follow a lot of creeds where, when you read through the creed, when you go through like the second London Baptist confessions, Westminster confessions, oftentimes the scriptures cited are the ones that are attacked the most. It's almost like they said, let's just get all the references in those creeds and let's just attack those first. And so 1 John 5:7, 1 Timothy 3:16, 2 Timothy 3 15 to 17, where it's talking about all scripture is given by inspiration of God. These verses are really attacked. And so there is an attack on the Word of God. There is an attack on the Textus Receptus, and I just find it amazing that these guys tend to use a historic nostalgia. So it's like, Oxford University and Cambridge University and all this stuff, where most of those are so woke today. I mean, they're teaching climate change and all this other stuff still. And I'm sure if you go there, you probably have to be vaccinated to the back teeth and all the rest of it. So they've got all this pseudoscience around them that most of them would believe in evolution. And there's not much truth in these anymore. And I think as Christians, we've got to be really careful about getting sucked into some historic nostalgia, thinking that something in the past was like it had a banner, and then they're bringing it into this day and age and saying this is exactly the same thing, but it's not. It's just got the same name and the same sort of skeleton, but the meat on it is completely different. I'll read through some of these comments and we'll start our video. So Shall Stand Forever says, God bless you, Nick. God bless you. God bless you all in Jesus Christ. Thanks, Stand Forever. Permafrost says, starting to put all the Mark Ward clones into the UFO and flat earth category. I was actually reading through some of the comments on my YouTube a year ago, and James Snap Jr. was saying that that I was like a flat earther. And I was like, man, it's a pretty huge accusation to say that, because I had a debate with him. Now I'm debating and saying, look, I'm not saying the Ruckmanite position, the Ripplinger position, but he keeps calling me, you're a King James onlyist and all this. And it's like, dude, where was your Bible? where was your exact Bible? Like forever, who's using the James Snap Greek text that he has? Where are all the Bible translations from that around the world? They're non-existent. But where's even just an English translation of that people are using? They're not. And so it's like, it's easy to mock others, but it's like seriously, I sort of have to bite my tongue with James Snap. Like, obviously he's got ability in going into details, into manuscripts and things like that. But at the end of the day, when you just hold up his position, you hold it up to the light, you don't see much hope of his position being the one that's talked about in the Bible, that everyone would have the Word of God. Don't add or subtract from the Word, because you're going to know where this Bible is. You wouldn't know that with James Snap, because it's always sort of changing. And even when I debated him, I was actually thinking this the other day, because a lot of people don't know this. When I debated James Snap, he had a list of 10 places where the Textus Receptus departed from what he believed was the true Greek text. Okay. And so I wrote out, I think it was 9 of those, and I think I added Revelation 16:5. So he wrote back and said, look, I don't want to do Revelation 16:5. Let's do this other verse. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went through and studied all those 10. Now, when the time came, he said, look, I've been looking at 3 or 4 of these and I don't want to do them. I want to do these other ones. And I'm like, I've actually already like studied these for quite, sometimes I'd spend, 3 or 4 hours on one verse and I've already done the homework on them. And then he threw another 4 in and took 4 out. And it's like, okay. And I was just like, okay, cool. Like all the way through, I was just like, cool, no worries. And then I think then he gave me like 15 verses and it was a completely different list. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And so it basically came down to, I think it was 2 days before the debate happened, we got a definitive list. And he was like, even when we were talking about like the 10 that we were going to talk about, I think we talked about 15, the 10 that we were talking about initially, he would send a list and there'd be another one changed down the bottom that he hadn't even talked about. And so this was happening all the way up until the debate. So basically I did all this extra homework. And so even in the debate, I'm just sort of, there's ones there that I'm like, man, I've only looked at that for like half an hour because I just didn't have time because he kept changing the goalposts. And then, so what happened was we were going through the debate and usually his usual pattern was, this is a mistake in the TR. Nick should really get rid of this verse and here's my argument for it. And so I'm going through that sort of pattern. So then he threw one in there that he was saying should be in the TR. And he's in agreement that it's in the TR. And so in our debate, he's gone into that mode and, talking the way he does and everything. And so I've gone and I've started defending it. And he just went, hey, you weren't even listening to me. I'm saying it should be in the TR. And I'm like, it's like a shell game. He's done a trick on you all of a sudden. And it's like a gotcha moment. And so I sort of felt, and then he started just calling me a flat earther and all the rest of it. And I'm like, man, this isn't really scholarly. And as much as I allow James Snap on the Textus Receptus Academy to say stuff, at the end of the day, he was being a real jerk when I look back. And a lot of people felt that. And even when it came down to examining the Mike Holner, Mike Ferrando debate they both debated James Snap. And he was doing the same to them. And I think I did an after party on both of those debates. And James Snap was doing the whole, you guys are flat earth. You guys don't think for yourselves. And you guys are you're in a cult and all this. And I was like, man, well, I think we're being way more gracious, but obviously he doesn't have a full fan base or anything, or there's like who agrees with his exact position. He's created his own little unique thing. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because it was quite annoying going through that whole rigmarole with James Snap. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, I'll have him on the program. And so I invited him on and we talked about things and I bit my tongue and didn't say, hey, you're in a cult. You're the one in a cult. You're a flat earth. I didn't say that. I was just like, well, okay, well, let's just see how he studies. And because a lot of people do appreciate his work. Like if he does the same study as someone into the last 12 verses of Mark, say, like his stuff is really good, but then he has his own little twist at the end where Mark didn't write it, his disciples did or something, or Peter's disciples or whatever thing they make up, but or he makes up. But I think Maurice Robinson also has that type of thing where it seems like people who do believe in the long ending, they tend to sort of capitulate and go, well, yeah, the style's different, and so let's just say that the disciples wrote it, So anyway, effective nutrition is in the house. Hannah was talking about entropy there. Great point about maintenance, Nick. Good comparison. Bible highlighter, Donald W. Parry worked on the BHQ, so that would be the Hebrew Bible, and that would be the Mormon guy, Donald W. Parry, and this is used in the Dutch Bible. Okay, very interesting. Hello, yeah, hey, Bible Highlighter, good to see you. And so we have pushed back the Bible Highlighter Matthew Verschure debate until I think it was May that you mentioned that everyone would be ready for that. And so, yeah, that'll be cool. I'm open to any time. Hey, you know what, guys? I was thinking during the week, I want to do a online Bible conference on 1 John 5:7. So I was thinking of getting maybe 7 people involved. I would probably talk maybe Mike Ferrando, maybe Mike Holner, and perhaps Jeff Riddle. And so I'm not sure who I'm going to get at the moment who know specifically about 1 John 5:7, because I've debated on it. I've talked about it a lot, and there are a few little things that I've been involved with, the whole thing with Georgios Pabaniotis, talking to him. And so it would be good to have that type of thing. And maybe we can say, okay, 1 John 5:7 conference, and we can name it like, pushing back against modern day heretics who want to delete this verse or something. We don't want to just demonize everyone, but we want to make people know that, hey, we have a whole bunch of answers here. Because I think the thing is, we need to keep the momentum. When James Snapp did the debate on Standing for Truth against Mike Holner and Mike Ferrando, there was a lot of momentum there. And so I had them on my program the next week. And Praise I Am, who's part of the Standing for Truth guys, friends with them, he had Mike Ferrando on his program recently, and they talked about 1 John 5:7, and it was really good. Like, I've gone through a lot of that information. So some of it would have gone over just, the average Joe, it would have gone over their head, but a lot of it, I was lapping it up going, man, this is such good information. And you know what's amazing? Like, God's involved with everything. That morning, I realized, because I've always been looking for a good audio reader. And even ChatGPT, sometimes I put stuff in there and I say, can you read through this? And it would refuse to do it. It would say, I'm not like an audio reader. You can download this one and that one. So I go there and it's like, hey, if you want to, this is a free trial. If you want to pay this much a month. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to pay. Because on my computer, I've got Balabolka. And so that's a free one. And that's really good. Even it's computer language, but it's like, it's great. But on my iPhone, I realized that there is a setting there. If you go to ChatGPT, it'll tell you how to activate that setting, so that if you're on any web page, you can just press the button and it'll read it for you. So I was like, cool, I'm going to utilize this. I'm going to start going through a whole bunch of stuff on Wikipedia and just go through, like Sinaiticus, and just go through it and go through 1 John 5:7. And so I thought I'd start on 1 John 5:7. So I was going through it. And while I'm going through that, I get a text from Mike Ferrando, and he sent me the video that he did with Praise I Am. And it was gold. I think it goes for like, is it 2 or 3? I think it goes for 3 hours, maybe 2. But no, I think it goes for 3. But really good video. Mike Ferrando, he's only really been studying this for about 5 years. And he just thought, well, because he's worked at the Library of Congress for 30 years. And he sent me tons of material on Revelation 16:5. Not the initial, argumentation of, this is the name of Jehovah and all that sort of stuff. But once that was sort of established, he was sending me like early church fathers quotations and all this sort of stuff. Which in my first edition, I only had like a smattering of that. In my book, I think there was like 15 examples. And so he was sending me a lot of that stuff. And he was sending me lots of stuff on 1 John 5:7 as well. So he actually admitted that when he first started studying it, he felt like it probably wasn't genuine. Now he's just so convinced that it's genuine, he can't get over it. And so I think, and the thing is too, Mike Ferrando, his eyes are getting really bad. It's to the point where he can't. I remember when he was debating James Snapp, he couldn't read what was on the screen, and Mike Holner had to read stuff, and so there's these type of issues. And so I think it's time for us to really be a bit more assertive and to push our views out there and to let people know that we have some really good answers for, why is 1 John 5:7 taken out, and to let people know distinctly, because one thing that's really happened, I guess lately, I'm realizing that a lot of people are coming around to the whole Easter thing. Now, I know some people who jump on the channel and that they've got issues with Easter, and even on the Textus Receptus Academy, like half the comments, there was like 100 comments, and half of them were like, no, Easter's a pagan thing. But that's way better than it used to be. Like, it used to be pretty much everyone against like me and Will Kinney, and so now it's like half the people are like, actually they're either defaulting to, oh well, I think it's a synonym with Passover, or they're going, yeah, I think it is the resurrection celebration. And even like in Bryan Ross's book, when he goes through the etymology, he sort of does go, well, it does have its etymology in just dawn, in dawning, the rising up and this type of thing. And so I'm pretty, I was pretty excited about that, because I guess for years and years and years, I've pushed the whole Easter thing over and over and over, to the point now it's sort of saturation point and people are coming around. And so I was thinking, with 1 John 5:7, it'd be great to do a conference. Now, I know the King James Bible Research Council just did a conference. I listened to all their stuff. It was on this different webpage, something Calvin Baptist Church webpage. No, Reformed Baptist Church webpage or something like that. And so I listened to all of their teaching, and a lot of it was just good. It was, pretty stock standard stuff that you would hear, Dean Burgon Society type of thing. And they had Kirk DeVitro there, which I felt was a really good move, because now that, D.A. Waite has passed away, because D.A. Waite was very strict on who you associate with. And, if you didn't wear the right type of, Dean Burgon Society pants, you couldn't fellowship, sort of thing. And, and some of them were very strict. If you had been divorced before you were saved and then came to Christ, you could never be in ministry. And so some people have, had, multiple relationships, have been involved in all sorts of weird things. They come to Christ, and then it's like, well, you can never be a leader. And it's like, where I'm like, well, you're a new creation. And so there were some things that D.A. Waite believed that a lot of people felt was a bit fuddy-duddy, but he did a really good work, with the Dean Burgon Society and the Bible for Today ministries sort of thing. So, Kirk DeVitro being the head, being the guy who's basically inherited that, it was good that he's getting involved with some other guys, because what I feel like the Dean Burgon Society had a little bit of an upper edge over something like the King James Bible Research Council. The King James Bible Research Council seemed to be coming more from like preachers who are like, we're King James guys, and they're sort of figuring stuff out. When it came from the Dean Burgon Society, they seem to be a little bit more academic. But it would be good for anyone involved with the Dean Burgon Society to sort of get involved with the King James Research Council, because that will help with a lot of things, I think. Because there are some things that I've said, and people in the King James Bible Research Council have sort of had issue with, and I'm like, I'm just saying what D.A. Waite said, like, 20 years ago. It's nothing new, but they don't know it, and so it'd be good for these guys to cross-pollinate. And but anyway. Yeah, so it'd be great to have, and I was thinking too, if we do a 1 John 5:7 like conference online, and I was thinking too, it doesn't have to be live. For some people, it would be good to do it live, or maybe what we can do is we can do recorded messages, like do premieres, put them up, and then have an after party sort of thing where everyone can just chat about certain things, or we can go through it like we do with these videos. And maybe the conference doesn't have to be, all in one weekend sort of thing. Maybe we can stretch it out to like, say a 2-week period where we're sort of releasing a video, and then we're talking about it for the next, 3 or 4 days. And then we're releasing another video talking about it, releasing another video, and just sort of saturating that whole time with 1 John 5:7. And I thought, if that works out well, maybe we can move on to other things like the last 12 verses of Mark, and then go on to the woman caught in adultery, and get keynote speakers who know quite a lot about that particular topic. Because I guess it is interesting. Like, I do come across people who don't know about certain variants and don't know that there's certain answers. So I'll be chatting away on Facebook, and some people will just say, well, Erasmus in his last 6 verses of the book of Revelation had to back translate. I'm like, yeah, there's been a development there, and so it'd be good to talk about those type of things. And I guess a lot of these things are actually talked about by the Reformation Bible Society and others, but I think it'd be good to do an online thing, and it would be good to get people who are already versed on these things. So say, like, I was thinking Jeff Riddle's, he's versed in lots of different things, and so he would be an interesting guy to get on certain points, but it'd be good to get him on points that he's already really strong on. I say if I got invited to a conference that was on Revelation 16:5, it's like, cool, I could talk about that, or 1 John 5:7, and that's why I was like, I could probably, make a good contribution toward that. And say Mike Ferrando, obviously he's, talking about that, Mike Holner talking about that. And so there's a whole bunch of people who have specifics. Now, there are people out there, like I'm really encouraged with Joseph Weissman and his Bereath Press. If you haven't looked into his stuff, I interviewed him on this channel a few months back, and the answers that he's giving for Old Testament, so-called contradictions, or we should go to the Septuagint for this reading or whatever. For his defense of the Masoretic text, it's gold. And he's probably, I would say at the moment, he's probably one of the most important guys on the internet when it comes to Old Testament defense and the Masoretic text. And so that's not saying he's the most important guy around, but he's the most important guy who's on the internet at the moment, putting out this information. So if we were to do something on the Old Testament, that would be an amazing thing to go through. And so let me know, who else would be who else is prolific in talking about 1 John 5:7, because, and I don't have to limit it to 7. We can have 10, or if we only have 6, it's like, okay, cool, but that's in my mind and in my spirit at the moment. I'm just constantly thinking about it, going, that would be a really good thing, because sometimes just saturating Facebook, YouTube, just saturating the internet with this type of material, it at least can get people to turn their heads and go, okay, well, this is an interesting thing. These guys are saying the verse is genuine. It gets people talking. And then what we want to do is we want to make the arguments that we have household arguments. Now, sure, people go through your argumentation, pick it to pieces, say you're an idiot, say you're a moron, say you're illiterate, say you're a King James onlyist or whatever. But that's what we want as well. We want people to actually go through our material. If it stands, it stands. And that's one thing with the whole Revelation 16:5 thing, because I'm constantly pushing on that. People, they're coming against me. They're showing, stuff. Oh, you spelt this wrong, or what about this quotation over here? And what it does, it just sharpens the argument to the point where it just gets down to a core argument. And it actually helps us when we meet someone who doesn't know the argument. We can get rid of all the fluff and go, well, this is the core. And so that would be a great thing to do on 1 John 5:7. So Bible Highlighter is just saying hello. He's typing on his phone. Effective Nutrition says, hey, Nick, it seems you're really in tune to MAGA sentiment. Your social media must be funneling you into that perspective. Yeah, I think, I guess the thing is, like, most people were like, Trump was just saying what everyone was thinking. I think that's what they've done. They've gone with, okay, well, Trump, that they do, scans on Google. What are people searching for? What are people worried about? And so Trump just said, hey, I'm going to answer this, 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 and this. And people are like, yeah. And then he gets in and goes, okay, well, forget all that. Let's just do this, this, this. And he's just doing the opposite in a lot of big decisions. Like in some of the smaller things, it's like, yeah, you can't, you have to call a woman, and you have to, we're not going to have LBGT, family readings with the kids anymore, and all this sort of stuff. It's like, people are excited about that, but it's like, we're bombing the Middle East, and Australia, he's pressured Australia to get involved, and we've just sent troops there. And we didn't even know what it was about. Like, he was just like, we're going in there. And he was saying all this stuff. And even the politicians are like, we don't really, he hasn't really got a goal and objective. It's just like create chaos in the region. And that's what I think it is. It's just to create complete chaos in that area, so that there is going to be another 20 years of war there. And then the military industrial complex make a whole bunch of money. Banks make a whole bunch of money, and the oil gets distributed certain places. Oil prices go up in certain places. I mean, we've only got, like, they're saying about 2 weeks until Australia basically has a massive economic meltdown. It's the worst crisis ever. And Asia, if you just look in Asia, there's lines to the petrol pump. Like, they can't get fuel. Like, I know the gas has stopped going into these places. People can't cook. And so it's basically, most of Asia is just so affected already. Australia, we've got like 500 petrol stations here in Australia that don't have fuel. There's people who are just panic buying, and they're like, look, don't panic buy, or you're going to take it all, But it's getting to the point where it is a huge worldwide global crisis. And we're just looking at it going, what is going on, guys? And that we've been pressured to get involved with this. We've followed America into every single war, and then Trump turned around and basically said Australia are a bunch of cowards because we didn't follow him sort of just straight into Iran. And it's like, God, it just basically spat on the grave of hundreds of thousands of Australians who have gone and died for the British Empire, been involved with Korea, Vietnam, pretty much everything the Americans wanted to do. And we've gone, yes, sir, we'll go in there. And with the promise of protection. And now they're saying that America's basically saying that, we should just decouple ourselves from Australia and all this sort of stuff. It's like, okay, that's new. And America have a spy base here of 1,000 CIA officers who spy on us. And that's in the heart of Australia. They're living here. They're in the heart of Australia. They're watching. They're probably listening to this now. It's come up on their radar. Oh, someone's talking about us at Pine. Just Google Pine Gap. And Americans bought it for a peppercorn. They swapped a peppercorn, and we gave them a whole bunch of land, and they built a spy base, and they spy on us. They track every phone call, every conversation that goes through them, through the NSA. And so, we've been bombing all our neighbors. We've got 3,000 American troops here in Australia. So we aren't independent. A lot of people don't understand that. We had our government overthrown in 1975 by the Americans, and the CIA overthrew our government. So we are just like, we're like Alaska or something. we're further away, but we are just part of America. Like, even in this fuel crisis, we have 4 massive oil wells, but they're owned by American companies. So the oil is still going back to America. We're just getting fleeced here. we're getting robbed. People are like, we've got so much resource. Where's it all going? It's like, oh, it's going to America. Okay. We're just getting robbed. And so there's nothing we can really do about it. That's just the way it is. And Argentina, many other places used to be prosperous, and then they've just been munched through. Their economy's just destroyed. And but anyway, it's a whole nother topic. But yeah, so a lot of Aussies are looking at the whole MAGA thing, going, well, what's all this about? Because we are facing it way worse than the Americans are. And people, it's getting to the point where the food, like in a country like Pakistan that I know quite a lot about and keep my finger on the pulse with, the food there has tripled in price since the conflict. They're right next door. And the thing is, when America bombed Afghanistan, they, like a country like Pakistan, they would have like 5 million Afghani refugees all of a sudden. Like, what's going to happen when Iranians start pouring over the border? You know, it destabilizes the whole region. And the only reason they're not going into Pakistan is because they actually do have weapons of mass destruction, and they have weapons that can bomb Israel, nuclear. And so notice they're only bombing Iran. They're not bombing in Pakistan, or not even talking about it yet. I dare say the only way they could get to Pakistan is actually through infiltration. But yeah, interesting times. Bible highlighter's got to run. Effective Nutrition says, laughing out loud, that's a good point. It's the same when challenging people's doctrines on any Bible. They abscond to the Greek and lose themselves and you in the process. Yeah, it's so true. I call it Greek and Hebrewing it. Sometimes I'll be talking to Jehovah's Witnesses and they'll Greek and Hebrew it. They would say, well, in the Greek or in the Hebrew, it says this. And so I'd do the same thing to them. I'd say, well, in the Greek, it's this word. And I'll ask them, did you know that? And they're like, they don't want to admit that they don't know anything. And so you just befuddle them with Greek and Hebrew information. And so I'd often say to my friends, they'd say, oh, how'd you go talking to that Jehovah's Witness guy? And I'd say, oh, I Greek and Hebrewed it. In other words, I just befuddled them with Greek and Hebrew stuff to make them look silly, make them feel silly, you know. Effective Nutrition says, I just looked into your James Snap debate today. It shocked me that he's promoting the removal of Acts 8:37, a very scripture his doctrine uses for confession that needs to be made before salvation. Yeah, it is. And see, the thing is too, like when you're listening to these atheists like I said Dan Wallace, maybe Dan McClellan, Bart Ehrman, you know, these other guys who are atheists, you know, Derek from Myth Vision. When you like CJ Cornthwaite, they seem to have a Bible. They've cut out all these bits, okay? And oftentimes too, they're saying, well, you know, this book is a forgery, this other one. So they only have this, they have a different creature than we do. It's a lot slimmer, but it's weird looking and it's different. And so, but they judge Jesus by looking at that. So when we're looking at the fuller picture, we're looking at the real Jesus and saying, well, what about this verse and what about that verse? And they just go, well, it's not in there. It shouldn't be in there. That's a contradiction, or that's a that's a forgery, and all the rest of it. But the thing is too, some of these guys who are in the majority text movement, Byzantine priority, or you know, obviously the critical text movement, they seem to have that different type of Jesus too. So because if your statement of faith says, you know, you really need to confess before baptism, that's fantastic. It's in scripture. But if you have that scripture and it's not there, and that's why I can't understand someone like James White. He adheres to like the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, which is, you know, in a lot of ways it's just a Westminster but with a different haircut. But they oftentimes the scriptures used and the wording is obviously related to those scriptures, but he doesn't believe those things. Like even just having these three are one, it seems to be a core Trinitarian. Yeah, these three are one, but it's not in their scripture anymore. So they actually they're creating a different type of doctrine, which is, yeah, it's strange. It shows you how powerful this is, because what we're talking about is the defense of the most very core thing. So like when it comes to politics, like someone like Ron Paul and saying, hey, everyone else has voted for something and he's the only one who's voted against it. Us TR people are like that. We're like, no, we're sticking with the core fundamental things, which is the Textus Receptus, the Masoretic text. We're defending those, and we're not going to budge. We're going to always vote no, and we're going to go with this. And so they just call us fuddy-duddies and tease us. But yeah, it's I think it's very important. Shall Stand Forever says modern Bible onlyists, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus onlyists, a very high-minded approach they demonstrate. I'll admit I don't have much endurance for Snap's approach. He's in great need of humility. Yes. Effective Nutrition, same. He doesn't allow much challenge on his Facebook page. Well, even he was talking against 1 John 5:7. And so a lot of people would chat about that on his page. And so he actually put a ban for a year. No one can talk about it for a year. But then I think it was Dwayne Green said, okay, the year's up, or no, he pointed out to some link about 1 John 5:7. Okay. And he asked if he was allowed to talk about it. And that basically the answer was, okay. And they talk in this pirate language, sort of thing. Aye, matey, the captain has allowed this. And so they allowed people to talk about it. And so I put my 5 cents in there, and James Snap said, and I said, well, unless you want to block me, or something. And he said, yeah, I really do want to block you because you shouldn't be talking about this. And I'm like, well, the whole thread is about everyone talking about this. Why am I the only one who's getting slapped over the hand here? So yeah, it was strange. Shall Stand Forever says, Mike Ferrando, love his work on 1 John 5:7. Yes. I've downloaded it and need to finish reading it. Yeah. Shall Stand Forever. Yes, I haven't got through it all, but I've listened to quite a bit. And that would be a good thing too. Like if we do a conference, to put all the resources, like say Michael Maynard's book, people can download that PDF, Mike Ferrando's material, and just anything else that's out there. We could create a bit of a database of links where people can download all this stuff. That would be classic. And so, yeah, Shall Stand Forever. Listen to that, Mike, and Praise I Am, that is. Yes. James Sheffield is in the house, the father of Jonathan Sheffield. Good to see you, James. Dean Burgon Society ultimately is open to another updated TR translation. I knew someone who was in the Dean Burgon Society, but some of their stuff was very good. I don't follow them as much now. Well, they're pretty much fizzed out as far as I can see. And I guess that's why Kirk DeVitro, is associating now with Phil Stringer, because Phil Stringer had sort of left the Dean Burgon Society and was seen as a bit of a traitor, for doing that. By Waite. I think Waite sort of had a lot of sway over, who could be involved and who wasn't involved. Shall Stand Forever says, I'm personally settled on the King James and don't see any need for an update. Okay. Yeah, and I don't see any need for an update to correct anything. Obviously, I've worked on the 2023 edition. I've got no problem with words being modernized, But the thing is, sometimes in modernization, that's where you got to be very careful that you're not updating and making words say things that they weren't saying back in 1611. That's quite a big concern when it comes to updates. Shall Stand Forever. I don't know too much about him, Nick, but he had some good things on 1 John 5:7. Stephen Avery. Yeah, so I've interviewed Stephen Avery quite a lot. We actually worked on 1 John 5:7 together for quite a few months, and that was we were talking about Bryennius and Calicus and even Erasmus, and also Eugenius Vulgaris, all that sort of information we're chatting about. But yeah, that would be interesting to get Stephen Avery. I'm convinced the US just knew Israel was going to go at it alone, and they followed up on that understanding. Okay. Following Truth says Trump basically slated every nation that they're allies of the United States, including the UK. They are their allies. Yeah. He will be on his one, but he says they are the greatest and best, so don't need anyone else anyway. Yeah, that was one of the things he said. We want all these other countries to help us, and we were sort of like, what's the main goal here? You know, like we've already gone into Afghanistan, we're going to Iraq, and we've followed into that, into Vietnam. We've done all these things. We're never sort of winning these wars. Do we want to commit to this? So people, obviously who are anti-war here are like, no, and it was pretty loud and clear. And then because the Prime Minister said, look, no, well, I don't see us getting involved is going to help. Then the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked. So we're like, okay, we're going to have an economic meltdown. Half of Asia is already experiencing that. Prices are going through the roof, and we're basically stuffed. And then it's like Trump said, I'm only testing you to see whether you're loyal. And it's like, okay. And then so now they're sending troops. It's like, he's basically sort of just threatened everyone, like, this is just going to continue. And I think it's completely on purpose. I don't think that this is just, Trump waking up one morning and tweeting something and having, brain fog or whatever. I think all of this, right down to what we're doing today, is all on purpose. This is, global hegemony, and also just to keep the military industrial complex going, and like I've always said, the United States is run by the military. The political parties and people involved are just like the halftime cha-cha girls to keep everyone thinking that they're actually, if they vote, it's going to help. Like voting nowadays is like sending letters off to the North Pole to Santa, making a wish. And what do? Do you vote harder? It's like, I'm gonna put my pen and I'm gonna write it harder. I'm gonna tick the box harder. What do? You see someone who's got all these promises, and then this, I saw the same with Obama. A lot of people like, he's going to be anti-war, and completely wasn't. and then same with Trump. I'm anti-war. I'm the peace president, and then now he's bombing. And his ministers are saying they're going to turn Iran, but they're going to send them back to the Stone Age. I thought they were concerned about these protesters and everything. They're going to send it back to the Stone Age. That's his cabinet saying that, and it's like, man, my heart goes out for those people. And the thing is, I lived in Pakistan for a year. I love those people, and it's not that far from Iran. And I know heaps of Iranians too. My old landlord, him and his wife are Iranian. Great people. Love them. And it's so tragic to see what's happening. Anyway, what can you do? Shall stand forever. He means own, I think. He'll be on his own. Yes. Republicanism is dead. Corporate Babylon is regaining control. Shall stand forever says, yep, tried. Iran has been in their plans for a long, long time. Yes. So anyway, let's get to this. I've yapped on for an hour. So let's get to this video here, and let's see what Bart Ehrman's got to say.
I don't know. Be interesting to find out. The big problem I have with thinking that we can show that Jesus was raised from the dead historically is part of a larger issue that I want to address here as my final point. It has to do with historians and the problem of miracle. Let me return to what ancient historians can do. Some things they can do, some things they cannot. Ancient historians can look at whatever are the material and literary remains. That's what they do for a living. They determine what probably happened based on an analysis of these material and literary remains. Okay? What can they not do? There are lots of things that historians cannot do. Historians cannot use history to construct a house. Historians cannot do history in order to explain the Pythagorean theorem. They can explain how Pythagoras came up with it, but they can't do math with it. There are lots of things historians cannot do, even with things connected to the past. Historians cannot establish what probably happened for events that have no record. For example, what did your grandfather eat on May 3rd, 1971? There's no way to know. You might guess, but maybe you do have a record. I doubt it. But so a historian can't show, well, yeah, he probably did eat liverwurst that day. Yeah, so you can't establish certain things for which you have no record. Historians cannot explain events that happen outside of history. They study history. If something happens outside of history, it's not the provenance of historians. Okay? Historians can never establish that what never happens probably did happen. I'll just give you an illustration of what I mean. Historians are not scientists, but they do know that some things never happen. For example, the second law of thermodynamics requires increased entropy in.
So that's exactly what Hannah was talking about, the entropy. I haven't actually looked at this section. I've listened to the whole thing all the way through, but a long time ago, or when it happened. And so but he's talking about the second law of thermodynamics there, like me and Hannah were just chatting about.
Any closed system. Entropy always increases, it never decreases. That's why you never have something cold making something else hot. It's part of the second law of thermodynamics. It's why if you take a cup of black coffee and you pour cream in it and you stir it, the cream gets mixed in. You can never make it mix out. You can stir it till doomsday. The cream will never be mixed out of the coffee. It can't happen. It has never happened. What if you have three people who say, yeah, but, I saw somebody do it. I saw this guy stir that coffee and the cream came out. I saw it. Would you believe it? Well, if you believe it, then you haven't studied science, because I'm telling you, it cannot happen, and it never has happened. What's the probability that these three people actually did see it happen? Well, they might have thought they saw it happen. They might be lying about it. They might have been mistaken. They might have heard from somebody else that it happened. Did they actually see it happen? What's the probability? If something has never happened before, but somebody says they saw it happen, is it probable that it happened because the person said so? Or is it more probable that maybe they mistook what they saw, or that it was a magic?
Can you imagine him applying this same rule to evolution? Did anyone see a primate become a human? No one's seen that. No one. There's no proof of that. But it happened. It's a miracle. And so this is the problem in evolutionism. You've got so many miracles that have to happen, all the way from goo in the river or in the ocean or wherever they believe the goo started, and just all of a sudden being able to be alive, for starters. That's a huge leap, probably the most major one. But then you've got these leaps of it became some sort of bit of slime. It became a simple life form, which nowadays we know under a microscope a simple life form is more complex than the city of New York, and so that's the simplest life form we have. And how did that just all of a sudden come to be? And then how did that produce other life? Sure, maybe something could become alive, but maybe it could just die after an hour or after 100 years. How does it produce something else? And then just continually move on, and then grow gills and become a fish, and then that fish wants to go on the land and become a bear or whatever. It's like it takes all these leaps of faith, and even just for something to have an upper jaw, and how did it know to have a lower jaw? Even just teeth is a miracle. An eyeball is a miracle. Everything about us is a miracle. But these guys just think that it's natural and it's just normal. And so these guys can't see the hand of a creator in any of this. So they have to get rid of a creator. So once you get rid of a creator, you have to get rid of the whole concept of the supernatural. See, when you believe in a creator, when something supernatural happens, you go, well, yeah, if God can create all the fish in the ocean, there's some pretty amazing fish. If he can just do that in by speaking it into existence, like Jesus rising from the dead is nothing to God. He can do all things. And so this is the thing, that when you examine their belief, they believe in miracles. So imagine, like, what's a greater miracle, like Jesus rising from the dead, or us coming from a type of monkey type figure, like a primate? Like that's a huge miracle, that we come from a monkey, or that life just magically appeared. Like, to say that life got resurrection, like there's been life and it's been revived after 3 days. Well, what's a bigger miracle, that life just came from nothing? You know what I mean? Like, their evolutionary tales have miracles all the way through them. And I'm only just scratching the surface. When you get into all the details about cells and about atoms and about the mathematical complexity of life and everything involved with it, it's like you have to see a designer there. You can't but see that this is being designed and created by something or someone. And so they have to throw all of that out and then adopt a type of, like, Hinduism. So basically, evolution is just a type of Hinduism. And they say it's all just naturalistic. It's only what you can see with your eye. But they're negating the fact that just a sunflower has the Fibonacci sequence in it. Like, how do you explain that? How do you explain the laws of thermodynamics? How did that come into being? Doesn't that prove that there was something perfect in the beginning, and it's actually entropy? Everything is decaying. Shouldn't it? Like, it's going to get to a point where everything is just gone. And doesn't that prove that there was something pure in the beginning? And it's actually like the sun. The sun is a fuel. It's burning. It's like having a big pile of wood that's burning, and it's eventually just going to burn itself out to nothing. But there must have been a beginning to that. There must have been a beginning to everything, and then it's just constantly going downhill. Doesn't that prove that there was something bigger and more perfect? And so, basically he's just getting the supernatural element out. Here we have a book, the Bible, claiming to be all about this supernatural God who made everything, but you can't have a resurrection in it. That's just silly. And he would not apply this type of thing to evolution. Like these things, like what do they call it? Abiogenesis, like life from non-life. Louis Pasteur said it's impossible to get life from non-life. If you got a rock, it's not going to produce another rock. If you got something living, it can produce something living, but you can't get life from non-life. Which, if you just look at that in itself, life comes from life. Okay, what is the original life giver to everything we see? What's God?
Trick, or that they heard it, or they what's more probable? Do people mistake what they see all the time? Do people fabricate things that didn't happen all the time?
2 minutes.
Does the law of thermodynamics get broken? No. So what's more probable? We cannot access supernatural explanation.
So he's actually not coming against the resurrection. He just wants you to doubt it. Okay. So originally we're talking about, okay, is there an empty tomb? We're talking about the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're talking about eyewitness claims. So, that's what should be discussed in a topic on the resurrection. Did Jesus rise from the dead? So instead now he's focused on, variations of the gospel accounts. Oh, you got Mark saying this from this angle. You've got Matthew saying this from this angle. Well, I don't think you can match them up. Well, you can easily match them up. It's so basic. Like, if you hadn't heard of Bart Ehrman or any of these contras, you'd never think these type of things that they say. They bring up all these so-called contradictions, and like seriously, some of them are so childish, they're so infantile in how they're explained, that it shows that they are not reading the scriptures. But they'll focus on variations, variants in the text, and that's their thing. If they can just find one manuscript with one variant, they'll focus in on that, like Bart Ehrman does with the angry Jesus healing in Mark 1. So then they talk about, he talks about transmission issues and historical uncertainty. And so this isn't actually dealing with the facts, because if the disciples knew that this was a load of rubbish, why would they go from basically fearing losing their life and running and all the rest of it to a full bold declaration where many of them died for their faith? And so I know there's lots of pushback. There's pretty much pushback on everything that comes out of a Christian's mouth. If you say, hey, the Christians died for their faith, well, it's pretty clear that that's happened throughout history. Fox's Book of Martyrs is a very interesting book to go through. But the fact is that these early disciples, if they were the ones who made this up, and they were persecuted and they were killed for their faith, and they lived lives basically on the run, why would they do that? Why would they live like that if it's just a lie? What did they gain from this? But persecution. Like look at Paul. Wherever he went, he just got slapped in the back of the head and bashed, and but he saw the risen Christ. What we see in the disciples who were walking and talking with Christ before he died, and they were with him after he died, we see that they were willing to die. They were willing to confront the Sanhedrin, and so what Bart Ehrman's actually doing, he's trying to just get you from talking about the issues, and he wants to just get you to doubt, just to general doubt. And so, I mean, there's plenty of things that you could just talk, like he's talking about, how do you know what my grandfather, what your grandfather ate for lunch on May the 3rd, 1971? It's like, well, historians can't do that. But the thing is, to say that the Bible is not a book of history, when all of the accounts, but when you look at even just the names of kings in the Old Testament, if you get other historical accounts, many of these kings are, they might be missing. In a sequence of kings, there might be certain kings missing. There might be certain names that are spelt wrong. The Bible is the only one that has it all lined up and in an order and in a sequence and with the correct spelling. And so proving its historical accuracy. So the first question, what ancient historians can do, they can look at the material and literary remains and determine what probably happened. And we can do that with the Bible. And I know that some people will talk about, this Roman governor was ruling and they did this taxation thing here and there's no proof of that. And it's like, well, oftentimes that's an argument from silence, just because we don't have any secular information about that of one event, but we do have biblical information about that, and it's probable that that happened, because when you look at the other events that are attested by history, other historical writings, Josephus, etc., they line up. And I saw CJ Cornthwaite, he did a video recently saying that the book of Acts is wrong because it's so accurate. And he's saying it's so suspicious that it's so accurate, because he probably, the guy who wrote the book of Acts knew history. He knew who was in leadership. He knew who was in control. He knew what was happening. He knew a whole bunch of stuff. And so he was putting all that into the book of Acts. That's why it's so historically accurate. So if you've got something that they deem inaccurate, the Bible's a piece of rubbish. But obviously, most of the time, you just have to show them more information, but they don't want to look at it. They want to keep their presupposition that the Bible's got mistakes. But then when you show them it's accurate, they go, yeah, because they copied. And the amazing thing is that another presupposition they have is they never seem to, like, the Christians can never have had an original thought or written down something that's like, hey, this is an original thing that's happened. It's all got to be, well, they copied that from the Odyssey. Paul going around on a boat in the Mediterranean. Well, which book talks about that? Well, the Odyssey is about that. And so they just have these strange and weird links and go, well, this is talking about something similar. Let's just say they copied it. And there's no proof of that. They're just throwing these things together. But yeah, imagine CJ Cornthwaite making a video saying the book of Acts is so accurate because it's a forgery. And it's like, okay, that's weird.
For natural events. If we think that the reason the Allies won World War II because God intervened, that's fine. You can believe that if you want. But historians cannot prove that God intervened. Historians have only access to things that happen in this world. Well,
but see, showing that God intervened in World War II, that would come down to a theological type of concept. Is God in control, or and all the rest of it? And does God control the affairs of men? And so I guess then you come down to Calvinistic type of argumentation, and is God sovereign over absolutely everything that happened, or is there a certain element of free will in God? In Scripture, when there's prophecy, he's documenting some of these things that happen. Like, say, Judas, did he have a free will to do his thing? I think he did. Calvinists would say he was predetermined to do what he did. I think God knew about it, but it was actually his free will that he historically looked back on, or from the past looked forward to and said, yeah, this is exactly what Judas is going to do, not I've predetermined that this is exactly what's going to happen. But that's completely different to looking at the evidence, like getting something in the lab, like getting it, like I said, a sunflower, and seeing the Fibonacci sequence there and saying, well, someone's put this Fibonacci sequence in this sunflower. How did it end up there? How did this sequence end up there? And that's just on a visual level, like, let alone looking at the microscopic, like looking at the atomic level, looking at atoms, neutrons, looking at the simpler forms of life, which there's no simple form of life. Every little bit of life is so complicated. Like I said, like the simplest cell is like the city of New York. But see, Darwin didn't know that. He just thought there's simple life. But now we know there's no, like, how did it get so complicated so suddenly? There is no simple life. There's no such thing as a simple life form. And so that it's different saying, oh, well, God has guided me to watch this YouTube channel. It's different than looking at something that you can feel and look at and study and go, I think someone designed this. It's like looking at a work of art, like painting by Da Vinci, and saying, well, there was no artist. A big cyclone came through and blew it around, and there would just happened to be paint there, and it just ended up like that. You would say I was nuts, but that's evolution is way worse than that. They're claiming that happened over and over and over again. So evolution is it's just complete fiction. And when you look at the charts that Dawkins is pointing to of we got this Cambrian explosion, then we've got all these different types of animals. Usually these charts are all cartoons. It's like believing in the Teletubbies or something. It's like believing in the Flintstones. You see a whale, and that they say like the little bones in the whale, or that was hips when it used to walk on land. And it's like, just the strangest, most bizarre things that people say. But unfortunately, this is one of the things that's happened in COVID. People have started to question the science, and I've watched this all happen, and people are like, if you question the science, and a lot of non-Christians are now saying, hey, you should be careful about the science that comes through. A lot of it's rubbish. But Christians are like, like evolution. Like if you are a young earth creationist, you've known that the scientific community has just been like completely overrun by people who just want to push this fantasy of evolution. And so the thing is, most people, they don't understand that evolution is a theory that doesn't work, and they've just amalgamated that with true science, and they're basically just saying they're the same thing, but they're not. Most of the things in the theory of evolution are not proven at all. Like microevolution, which is just variation, like a rabbit getting longer fur in the winter type of thing. It's like, well, that's just variation, and the Bible talks about that. Different types of animals, but having some type of animal, having some kind of animal like morph into another one, like, a bear morphing into a horse or something. It's just not proven. And that's the whole theory, is the evolution of the species. You got one type of species and it evolves into another type, and then they don't prove that. What they do is they prove that that birds get a bigger beak, or they've got a shorter beak depending on the food that they're eating. It's like, well, they're still a bird. They haven't become a bat, they haven't become a lizard. But that's the leap that they have. And so Bart Ehrman and all the crew, most of them believe in evolution, and so that's where they're coming from. And their worldview is they believe in all these miracles, and then they're scolding us for believing in specific miracles that are talked about in the Bible, which is about a God who is a supernatural God. What else would you expect? Would you expect that you would open up the Bible and not get supernatural stories from the Bible? Like, it's about God, the supernatural one who created everything. So of course you're going to get supernatural themes. But these guys believe in supernatural themes, but they just say it's natural, but it's never been proven. So anyway, we'll just move on from there. So Everyday Man of God Ministries is in the house, saying hello, Nick and everyone.
He said, well, God intervened in this world. Well, historians don't have access to the divine realm. They have only access to what happens here. What are miracles? Miracles are the least probable thing if you believe they happen. The reason you call them miracles.
So, in evolution, there's miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. And so, just life forming is like abiogenesis. I know people try and keep that separate from evolution, because you do get theistic evolution where God did it in the beginning. And then I can't understand for the life of me why someone who was a young earth creationist would go into evolutionism. To me, it's just a compromise. They've just been hanging around people who are browbeating them, and they get tired of just being the odd one out, where I would just say, look, never compromise on truth. But yeah, they believe in miracles. Like the life forms that ended up on land, like how did they find partners, and how did they actually have the reproductive system to, oh, you're a girl and you're a boy and we reproduce? Like, that's a miracle. And how do human beings have this in them? And the moon, the cycle of the moon, like affects this. There's just so much involved that you'd have to say that every part of creation is an absolute miracle. But they are saying that their creation story doesn't involve miracles. So evolution doesn't have any miracles; it's just all natural. But they don't have any proof for that. So they have, like Hinduism, they have a whole bunch of stories that are unproven. So I would like to see Bart Ehrman point his fingers back at himself and explain his belief in evolution, going through and having this type of criteria.
Is because they never happen. Well, they sometimes happen. Okay, how often do they happen? How often does somebody walk on the water? Never.
And so, but if that person is God in the flesh, like the Bible says, like it's not just going to be Auntie so-and-so next door. She walked on water, and if it is a book about a supernatural God who sent his son, Jesus, who is himself God, of course these things can happen, because if you naturally look around us, you see miracles everywhere that defy just that defy the criteria of rationality. Like I'm just talking about a sunflower, the Fibonacci sequence in it, like an eyeball. How do you explain an eyeball? Like evolving, just coming, like the first living creature that actually had an eyeball. How do you explain that? You can't. Like it just all of a sudden saw and heard, and these things become our senses, and it makes more sense that God was involved and made us the way we are. And then it's just like, why against like the laws of thermodynamics? Why was everything getting better and better? Why were we going from a simple life form and just becoming a whale, and becoming a human, and becoming a zebra, and becoming a dragonfly, and becoming how come it just kept going upwards when everything else is going downwards, coming from something better and getting worse, mutating and becoming weirder and stranger, and survival of the fittest.
What if somebody did? Well, okay, it's a miracle. It's not likely, though. Historians can only establish what likely happened. The inevitable problem is that if historians can only establish what probably happened in the past, and by their definition, miracles are not probable, then historians can never show that the most improbable thing is probable. This is not an anti-supernatural bias that I have, or that historians have. It's how history works.
And so he would never apply this to the theory of evolution, because it's a miracle how we came from a primate. That's a leap of faith. You have to have a lot of faith to think that we, you just rewind, you get in the DeLorean, in the time machine, go back, a couple of 100,000 years, and you are there with cavemen, and they are your ancestors. That takes a huge leap of faith. That takes religious faith, and like I said, it's just like Hinduism.
I had this view when I was a believing Christian. I knew that you could not prove a miracle using the historical methods.
Using the historical method that leaves God out of everything. The historical method that people would use that theoretically, but deep down, they have their own personal beliefs in evolution, in whatever, it might be aliens or whatever, but they have their own personal beliefs, and they always involve some sort of supernatural element. And I think it was even Richard Dawkins, when he was pressed, someone said, you get intelligent design from an intelligent designer. And he sort of said, okay, yeah, I can see that. And they said, could it have been aliens? He's like, maybe. So that was a possibility, that it could have been aliens. You know what I mean? anything but the Christian God. So it could have been some supernatural alien from outer space, which no one's ever seen. You know, there's the whole thing with aliens, like I mentioned in a previous video, that UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Did you know that everything is identified today? Because so many people stargaze, and also plane spotters, I think they call them, where they're watching planes, you know, go back and forward and writing down the numbers and looking on their phone at their apps and go, oh, that's the this Boeing that's coming in, that's landing in New York. And, you know, there so many people are looking to the skies and looking to the stars and looking at the moon and looking at all this stuff. There's nothing that is unidentified anymore. So there's no unidentified flying objects. Now, if you're around an American military base and, you know, something flies past, well, it's obviously part of they're testing their latest thing, which usually can be identified as well. So, you know, when it comes to, oh, you know, there's a UFO, you'll find a lot of these sightings were around military bases. Look at the description of these UFOs, and then you look at the type of aircraft that the military has today, and it's like, yeah, that looks like someone was testing that back in the 1980s or 90s or whatever, and they saw this thing zip past, and they described it, and then you look at what they have today, and it's exactly, you know, they're drawing these things. And so anyway, let's move on.
You could believe it. You can, I think it's right. You might, you know, but you cannot demonstrate it on historical grounds. There's a difference between theology and history and law. You can demonstrate some things through the law. You can demonstrate some things through history. Those things, those processes, legal processes and historical processes, cannot establish what God does. In the Christian tradition, Jesus did not have a near-death experience. God raised him from the dead. If you believe that God raised him from the dead, you have to believe in God. That's a theological belief, not a historical factum.
But I think it is a proven fact that there is a higher being. Whether that is an alien, whether that is, you know, whether that we're all in some matrix or something, there is something that has made what we see and what we feel and what our senses show us. And you can't deny that. Like, even when you go to the smallest level, the microscopic level, it's so complex that you wouldn't just look at a microchip and just say, oh, that, you know, if I just handed you a microchip and you examined it for 20 years, you wouldn't come to the conclusion that it just made itself, or just, oh, it used to be, you know, something else, and it's just over years just washed around the ocean and just became this, you know. And on the macro level, like looking at the planets and the stars and the sun and the moon and seasons and the waves of the ocean, and like everything is just amazingly like perfect here on Earth for life. One little thing out of whack, like if the moon was a little bit further away, we wouldn't have tides, and the oceans would just be stagnant. But we do have massive tides. We have, you know, that affects the reproductive cycle of a woman. Like, to me, this is just design, and if you can't see that design, to me, you've got blinders on.
And so historians can't show it. Okay, that's my conclusion. Good enough. Good enough. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ehrman. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for those introductions. A lot to talk about in the cross-examination. Just a reminder, and I'm going to bring Jonathan on here because we're going to go into a rebuttal stage of 10 minutes in just a second. By the way, some of you have asked about this in the audience. If you want a question to be aimed at a specific panelist, please, I mean, it's for everybody, then just say this is for both. But be specific in your questions for each panelist. If it is for Dr. Ehrman, if it is for Jonathan, say this question is for whoever. Now, again, because of our limited time, if you're going to get a question in on to the panelists, it needs to come through a super chat. If you want to have it sent to the panelists, it needs to come through super chat. Try to be specific in who you're addressing so we're not sitting here questioning who you're asking. All right. So, Jonathan, do you have anything you need to share for round 2 on your rebuttal?
Oh, no, I'm just going to...
Do I need to pull your screen up is my question.
No.
All right, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes again, and I will start with 10. I mean, you can go over a little bit. We've got some flexibility on these last 2 in the rebuttals, Jonathan. So I'm going to pull all of us off stage here, and then you'll have 10 minutes once more. I will notify you at least with 1 minute to go. Like you're 9 minutes in, I'm going to give you a notification. You know how much time you have from that point. We'll give you a couple seconds over if you need it. Okay.
Okay. No, thank you.
And just before we get started, I think one of the things is too, in Scripture, God often does things that go against the wisdom of men. And so how we think things should go, God often does the exact opposite to sort of make wise people cringe and go, why would you do that? Like, Jesus being sort of born in basically like a backyard sort of shed situation in a manger sort of thing. Now, I know that in the Middle East, it's very similar in Pakistan, where they have, we would go to places and stay, and they would have buffalo like that. Like my wife is oftentimes surprised that we just have here in Australia, like cattle just everywhere. And it's like, where are they going at night? And it's like, oh, they just stay there in the field, where it's, oftentimes, thieves would steal buffaloes or just, it's just a common thing to bring them into at least a stable. And oftentimes that is in the house. And so I remember one time we were at this one house and, we're getting shown around. There's the bedrooms, there's the kitchen, and hey, there's a room with the buffalo, and he's just there. And it opens up until he can sort of walk out a little bit, but he's tied up, and that's just where the buffalo is. And then a whole bunch of other animals, and like the farm and the house were sort of together. So that's the way that I sort of picture a lot of places in the Middle East in this time, that it would have been very rural like that. Sheep would have been like, I remember my auntie, she had a sheep. She was on a farm and the kids used to jump on the back of the sheep and it would run through the house, and they just had this sheep running around the house, fully grown, full of wool, and they'd hold on to it and run. It was great fun. But that's just sometimes farms you end up like that. You just end up having animals. And my friend had a pig, and all the kids used to ride the pig. But they all had warts on their legs, which wasn't a good thing. But yeah, that's how I picture that scene. And so sometimes God does everything in the reverse. So Jesus is not a beautiful guy with bright blue eyes and neon teeth, Benny Hinn teeth, and just 7 foot tall, and just this one that everyone would look to and say, wow, they're handsome, wow, they're well spoken. Well, he was like, it was to the point where Judas had to go and kiss the guy to point out who he was. He just looked like one of the boys. That they couldn't tell the difference. It wasn't like he stood out, and it clearly says that in Isaiah 53, like he has no comeliness that we should desire him. He's not like he's extra beautiful or anything like that. And he just comes from, like people are like, can anything good come out of Galilee? It's like, he's from a place where it's not known to have, leaders and kings and the ruler of the world come from that place. And but this is how God works. God tends to work like this. He gets something in the most obscure place, and points out that that is the best thing on the planet at the moment. And it's like, he's not from, here's Jesus from London. He's turned, or from Rome. He's turned up, or here's Jesus born in the temple in Jerusalem, on this specific day, and all the rest of it. It's like, no, just he's born in Bethlehem, and it's a bit like David, the whole story of Samuel anointing David. He went to the house and just looked with his eyes and was just anointing all the boys, and it's like, hang on, this isn't the one, and had to stop himself. And then they ran out of kids, and it's like, is there anyone else? It's like, oh yeah, David, but he's out the back with the sheep. Bring him in, and then he anoints him, and everyone's offended at that. Everyone's offended by, like, God's choices. Oftentimes, just they go against everything that we think, and that's a theme throughout the Bible. And see, this is the thing: there's no univocality in the Bible. Well, there are these themes, and there are these what would you say? Concepts that flow all the way through, that are obviously the nature of God throughout the whole Bible. And so they say there's no univocality. I see it everywhere. Whenever I'm reading the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I see themes of prophecy. I see themes of the nature and character of God. I see themes of redemption. I see lots and lots and lots of similarities. And you can see the one voice of God throughout that, where these atheists, and they've separated everything into their own little compartments. They've gotten Mark and chopped the end off that and chopped out a whole bunch of other verses, and they're doubting the book of Acts, and they're doubting Paul, and so they're left with all these strange little crumbs everywhere, and they're trying to eat it and go, oh, that's disgusting. Where if you just left it alone, it's beautiful, it's tasty. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Anyway, let's continue.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ehrman, for sharing your thesis. I think you made a lot of valid points, and I think it's going to serve well, obviously, in the cross-examination period. I think we got a lot of really good things to talk about. One of the points I want to address first, because I know Dr. Ehrman ended on it kind of last, is this kind of idea of miracles violating the law of physics. One of the things that I did bring up at the end of my opening was we do have an instance where the laws of physics did not hold at the Big Bang. And one of the points I was bringing up is that it appears that we have evidence that the resurrection of Jesus is another such singularity exemplifying this exception. So I'll kind of leave it on that. So there's a couple of things I want to point out from Dr. Ehrman's thesis on the ability of the historians. And I think one of the things that I kind of appreciated from reading the ancient historians, Plutarch, Livy, is they did feel like they could falsify, that these supernatural claims and these events could be falsifiable. They had enough information in their records that they can falsify them. And I think one of the differences that we actually see by comparison is when we look at the comments from Livy, Plutarch, and Cicero, what they were able to demonstrate for the supernatural claims of Romulus, I found it hard kind of seeing that in Dr. Ehrman's thesis. Normally, what is the credible naturalistic explanation for the events that happened in Judea? So, for example, when we look at the writings of Livy, Plutarch, and Cicero regarding their investigation into Romulus' supernatural event, what do they provide us in their historical investigation surrounding this similar supernatural event to Jesus? There's several parallels. So what they were able to uncover is that the senators, they identified the senators as the prime suspects in his murder. They also identified that the ascension to the heavens was actually fabricated by the senators to kind of throw off their scent or trail, to kind of cover their tracks. And they were smart enough that they instigated another patrician, Proculus Julius, Romulus's friend, to use his influence to kind of create this tale before the Senate to exonerate us and liberate public mourning. Case closed, no longer to look into it. So what we have is case closed, credible natural explanation explained. I know there was nothing supernatural about this event. And so when we look at the ancient historians, they feel pretty confident in their ability. Plutarch goes through a number of these such fables that he refers to them and provides naturalistic explanations. The other thing, when I was looking to Dr. Ehrman's, it sort of felt at the end of it, I used to like reading Agatha Christie novels, but I think in this case, kind of walk away without understanding who done it or what happened. And what you sort of hope for is, if Jesus and the resurrection were indeed a hoax, shouldn't we expect Dr. Ehrman's thesis to include details to those that we find in Lucian's treatise on Alexander the false prophet, exposing the fraud in Greek detail? If the job of the historian is, well, I'm going to explain the events in Judea, what happened here, why don't we see what we see in Lucian's account of the false prophet? And obviously, I love the work. It's really good. He actually describes the scene, how Alexander, the false prophet, sneaked off at night to the temple grounds to bury a makeshift goose egg with a snake to facilitate his scheme to sort of convince the populace to believe in the deity Glycon. He had his little snake puppet, and that's how he did it. And throughout this work of Lucian, he was able to actually uncover how did they get diluted. And I think, to Dr. Ehrman's point is, similar to what we see in Celsus and Porphyry, is this attack on the credibility of the witnesses. Fine. Maybe they were historical. Maybe they were grief-induced hallucinations. Maybe someone was telling a lie. However, what we don't have is how they were able to perfect that, how they were able to propagate this claim. While Dr. Ehrman maintains that the disciples and everyone in Galilee was literate, or there wasn't much learning or education, this certainly doesn't apply to the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Herods, the Romans, who were all privy to this event. And when we look at the Jewish histories that come down on this, it all kind of points in one direction. Because if we look at Celsus, Porphyry, and we look at the Talmud, what you see is they can't explain the magical elements or the sorcery of how Jesus is doing all these incredible things. And what's interesting is throughout the New Testament Gospels, what we see is everyone coming to check up on them. The Herods are coming over, or his team is coming in. Herod Antipas was very interested in meeting with Jesus and speaking to him. And there was something different here than obviously he saw in John the Baptist. And when we look at those narratives, we think, why couldn't a Greek like Celsus, Porphyry wrote 15 books against the Christians. We have Julian, the emperor, writing against the guy. Why couldn't they solve this problem? We hear a lot about how bad our testimony is, how bad, one woman, two, all these contradictions. What we're not hearing is what Lucian provided in Alexander the false prophet. We're not hearing what Plutarch was able to demonstrate for Romulus. So some of those things lead to conclusion that.
So I guess I would just say, because this is a debate, I would just have a little bit of pushback against Jonathan here, even though I'm on his side. But this is quite a common thing where he's expecting Bart Ehrman to just respond to his opening argumentation, where I guess the thing is they've both got opening statements that they'd prepared earlier, and then they debate on those issues. And so obviously Bart Ehrman wasn't, he's not going to go into a rebuttal stage in his opening statement. He's just going to say what he had, what his view is on, did Jesus rise from the dead? And so that's where I would just push back a little bit here, that he probably will go on to look at those other issues. So yeah, just a tiny bit of pushback there.
We have this big hoax being pulled off, and we have a number of educated elites.
But I'm in agreement with what he's saying.
In and around the surrounding area that are witnesses to what is going on the ground, and we don't have anyone that can actually explain what's going on. And that's why I kind of refer to it's sort of the Agatha Christie novel that you walk away with and you don't know who done it. The other thing
So Bible Highlighter says, atheists are without excuse. The creation makes it evident. And I think just logic tells us that. But also it's in Romans chapter 1, it does say that they are without excuse because of creation. So that's a very big thing. And it's a good mindset to go out into evangelism with, that if you're talking to someone, they are actually suppressing this type of logic, that it's logical to look at something, to look at a beautiful painting and say, well, there's a painter, to look at a building and say, well, there's an architect, to look at the design in creation and say there's creator. That's just logic, where you actually have to suppress that. And most people don't do that. Like even the demons believe and tremble. Like they're not silly enough to become atheists, sort of thing. We humans are, we're sillier. And I used to be an atheist, at times I would venture into agnosticism, and, on a poker machine or something, I'd be praying, for money or to whatever. I didn't even, Jesus wasn't even an option. It was just like, that's dumb, but maybe there's something there, and you would talk to it when you're drunk or whatever. But it's, anyway, let's move on.
I don't want to bring up, and I'll kind of touch on closely regarding Dr. Ehrman's thoughts on miracles and what's being said. There's a lot of observations throughout history where we have an observable black swan, which we see here in the resurrection throughout history, that we can't explain through natural.
So when he's talking about a black swan, that's just something in history that people have never seen before. And so there was a time where swans were only white, but then the more that people ventured and traveled, obviously we're talking about Europeans, they found a black swan. And it's like, oh, there's a black swan. I didn't know there was a black swan. And so I think it was Taleb who wrote a book called The Black Swan. It's not really to do just with that, but a whole bunch of other things. But the concept is there's something new, but it's always been there, but people just didn't know. They didn't know to investigate something or where to look. But now they found it, and there it is, sort of thing.
Realistic means. I think some notable observations we see from Nikolai Berdyaev in his Meaning of History. He tells us a little bit how when he remember how that the materialist interpretation of history, when he attempted it in his youth to verify by applying it to the destinies of people, broke down in the case of the Jews, where destiny seemed absolutely inexplicable from the materialistic standpoint. He understood that he left Marxism because he couldn't explain the Jews the history of the Jews from a naturalistic perspective. We see this in Mark Twain too. He looked at the Jewish, the events in history, and they couldn't explain. The only one not mortal was the Jew. So we do have these observations, and as historians, obviously, we have the opportunity to look into these events because we are collecting a lot of information on them from a lot of good, well-educated sources. I mean, Celsus did a lot of research for his work in understanding the Christian arguments and trying to publish an attack out there against Christianity. Porphyry wrote 15 books. Julian, the emperor, is trying to convert everything back over to Christianity. And I think the most important thing for me is, we had the Roman Empire, we had the Herods, well-educated. They understood how to investigate Roman cults. I think the Christians have probably been accused, or I think what we see in Pliny's writing kind of refer to some of the, I guess, the attacks that the forest people, or the Bacilli in the Roman Republic, they got accused of a lot of those. And we understood, then that Rome understood how to investigate these cults, how to get information, how to expose their conspiracies. And what we have here in Judea that starts spreading across the vast part of the empire is all these groups promoting this wild tale, and no one understands how it was done. All they needed to do is go back to the tomb. If he was left up on the cross, 1 minute. Okay, I'll finish up here. Once again, the resurrection of Jesus, which differentiates Christianity from the other religions, it is a falsifiable event. Just like the people were able to recognize in Herodias' tale of Aristarchus, they went to the Fuller's shop to check it out. The people coming back from overseas saw him going to Croton. They have this information, and one of the questions that Dr. Ehrman will speak about is, why don't we have anything like that for the resurrection of Jesus? We kind of have it for all these other legendary tales. Why not for this, which obviously took over the Roman Empire? With that, I will end my rebuttal.
I think that's a really good point, that even the story of Rome itself with Romulus, like the main characters behind Rome is named after him. People have gone through that material and said, hey, this is false. The senators most probably killed him. He didn't ascend up into heaven, and he's become this supernatural being and all the rest of it. And so, but they weren't doing that with Jesus, which is interesting. Bible Highlighter says, even some agnostics who seek for evidence still can't bring themselves to believe. Yeah, I guess some people don't want to believe that there's actually deeper reasoning. And for some people, if they believe, that means that they will be shunned by their family, their friends, and people like Bart Ehrman and all the rest of the agnostic atheists, hyper-skeptic guys are just an excuse that they can throw up, because they really don't want to deal with the whole fact of there being a God. They want to live in their sin, and so they throw these things up, because sometimes because to me, what we're doing, being Bible believers, we're just saying that the math adds up. We're just saying 1 + 1 = 2, where they're coming along saying 1 + 1 = 4, or someone says 9, or 122, or the thing is, the problem is, if they have to agree that 1 + 1 = 2, then they have to do the math test, sort of thing. They don't want to do the math test, and so they're just saying whatever. And also, by pushing these gurus forward, like just say the family have got arguments, you've got arguments against Christianity. The family is saying, hey, you should really be a believing person. You should come to church. You should be living for Christ, or whatever. They push Bart Ehrman forward. So then it just becomes way too complex. rather than just dealing with the actual issues. Some people get into this whole atheist community for a little while, and then after a while they go, yeah, I know, I should be a Christian, and they jump back into Christianity. And so they weren't really into it, were they? It's just like, hey, I've become a Hare Krishna all of a sudden, I've got a shaved head, but are they really into it? You know what I mean? Or is it just something, a fad, or is it just an excuse to run away from something? But I understand too, there is the flip side of that, where 95% of Christians who I've ever met are fakes. And Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, and a whole bunch of evangelical weird fakes out there. And there are the true, and it's so good when you meet them. But they cause people to be part of the religiously abused crowd, and there's a ton of people who are like that. I've met whole groups of people who are like, yeah, I used to go to this particular church, and the pastor was crazy and he committed adultery and this happened and that happened, and they've all got a horror story. And to me, it just makes more sense that, the pastor wasn't a Christian, and these people might have become Christians at one stage, but they've been turned away from church, or maybe they're false believers, that they've never believed, or the parable of the sower, all those stories kick in. Sometimes the word gets choked out by riches and cares of this life, but at the end of the day, there are a ton of people who are part of the religiously abused. And so oftentimes when you meet people who are atheists and all the rest of it, they've grown up in a Christian household where the dad used to bash them, and he was a psycho. And it's like, yeah, that's not really a representation of true Christianity, though, is it? Or they grew up a Catholic, and they could never reconcile the abuse that's in the church. And it's like, yeah, it's sort of nothing to do with Christianity, though. That's to do with the political system in Rome that just happens to have this, this Greek mythology that they've given a whole bunch of Bible names to. And so, but yeah, there is that side of it as well. They're religiously abused. Oftentimes they are becoming the agnostics, the atheists. And so, with some people, they are running from truth. What's it say in John chapter 3? Those who love the truth will come to the light, that their deeds be exposed. So those who don't want their deeds to be exposed, they're not coming to the light. If you're a criminal, you're not looking for a police station, are you? You're running from the police. You see the police, and you hide behind a letterbox or something. You're running the other way. But if you want truth, you're set, and that's usually the sign. If you see someone looking for more authority, more people to get involved with something, usually, to me, I'm like, they're probably seeking truth. If they're actually trying to get away from authority and away from scrutiny, that's, to me, it's like, oh, that's suspicious. Why wouldn't you want more light on this? Because you're dirty, So anyway, I'm preaching. Everyday Man of God Ministries says I try to pop in when I can. I've got an Android, and at times I feel illiterate when I'm typing on it. It is hard. I look back at some of the things I say. I'll type in something on Facebook, send it, and then I'm looking back a week later, and it's got 6 typos in it, and I'm like, oh man, that's wild. Autocorrect can be your worst enemy at times. Bible Highlighter says, so this tells me that Bart Ehrman never had a born-again experience. I cannot forget my radical change and the things that happened in my life. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. He grew up in a religious household. He says that he does have an experience and all the rest of it. But it just makes me wonder whether that has become the criteria for, like, people. Like, I know I haven't watched it, but apparently Mark Ward said that he doesn't have a salvation experience. But see, the thing is too, I know some people who are really good, strong, Bible-believing Christians, and they just grew up in church, and they they don't point to a time when they were sort of, pressured. Hey, you're 6 years old and you've been telling a few fibs lately. You need to repent and all this. And I guess sometimes there can be this expectation that people have to have this childhood. Like, yeah, I was using the wrong colored crayon and I realized it was wrong. And this sort of thing. Like I've heard so many testimonies of people having childhood, like 4 years old, they gave their life to Jesus, and I'm sort of like, man. Anyway, it just makes me wonder if people sometimes who are in a church, this is completely separate to Bart Ehrman, but when I saw that people were critiquing Mark Ward, does he have a salvation, like a point where he's like, okay, that's a point. Where sometimes I've heard people who lots of people would love and say, oh, they're good, solid TR guys. And I've heard them say that they grew up in church and just sort of realized that, yeah, one day they realized, hey, hang on, I'm a sinner, but I'm also believing God, so I'm saved, and it wasn't like they had this defining moment in time, but it was just a gradual over the years they realized something. But I mean, there can be people who gradually over the years are just dead religious and they never get converted. I mean, I'm sure there are so many youth groups with just kids who are just not saved. They are, as soon as they get the opportunity, they're going to run the other way. And so there's that, because the thing is, there's no grandchildren in the kingdom of God. There's, God has children, but he doesn't talk about grandchildren. Like the kids have got to make their own decisions, so you guide them in the best way possible. And, and this is where, the sort of hyper Calvinistic thing of God, ordained a whole bunch of people to go to heaven and a whole bunch of people to go to hell before the foundation of the world. I mean, how could you have a kid if you know that most people are going to end up false converts and false pretenders and all the rest of it, and they're not going to be saved? If you have a kid, the chance of that kid going to hell are really high. Just say it's like, Jesus said, wide is the gate, broad is the way that leads to destruction. What if you have a kid and you've just produced someone that's going to go to hell? So you're better off not having kids. So that's one of the dilemmas that people bring up with Calvinism. Bible Highlighter says, why are Christians the most persecuted? Why are Christians for their faith if it was not true? Yeah, and that's the thing. Why would these early Christians die for their faith if it's not a reality, if it's not something that they saw as true? And so, and who was it? Chuck Missler, Chuck Colson said, at Watergate, he had a bunch of people who all they had to do was just lie and keep the story straight, and none of them could keep the story straight. And he said, that sort of showed him that even, if you just have one of them defect, just say, Peter was just like, look, guys, this is all made up. Jesus never really did this and did that. But the thing is too, how can they be living in a society and making these type of claims? All it would take is for one person to turn around and say, hang on, that didn't happen, and write a full, surely whole communities would write a full counter, case against the Christians. So that never happened, and there would be, because they went everywhere. They went all throughout Israel. So you'd have all of Israel saying that never happened, that never happened. And then you'd have all the places that they went in the world, all the places that Paul went, they could just write a tome just saying, yeah, well, Paul, they've claimed this, they've claimed that, but that never happened, So that's why it's easier for these atheist skeptic guys to push everything back, or when I say back, I actually mean like forward. They push it to, instead of this happened in 40 AD or 60 AD or whatever, or this happened 200 years after Jesus, or late second, early third century. That's when these were written, which goes against the literature that was there, because they were talking about all these things. But And that's why they've got to deem, this is a forgery, that's a fake. That's because they're trying to push everything in that type of direction. So it's so far detached that it's written by someone else. So obviously it's a forgery sort of thing. Skeptic Philosophy says, why does it toll you that he never had a born-again experience? I guess it's tell you. Some people had this much and then question it later, ask how much was in their head. So I would say that definitely Bart Ehrman had religious experience. I guess one of the things is as far as running into true Bible believing, born again, genuine converts, I'm not sure that, from what I've ever heard Bart Ehrman say, I'm not sure that I would be guaranteed that if I ran into him, if I said a few things to him, it would probably upset him. Like, he seems like he's just a liberal. When he was, I was a born again Christian, I was a radical, I believe the Bible and all this sort of stuff. I think he was just young. But when he's mature enough to sort of make his own decisions and all the rest of it, I think if I ran into him on the streets, he would be a full liberal. And that's how I would view his Christianity. So, but unless I'm proven otherwise, that's just sort of, over the years, I've looked at a lot of Bart Ehrman stuff, read a lot of his books, put myself into his shoes, trying to figure out why he's come to this position. He talks about a lot of that in his book. What is it? Where he talks about God basically being a monster sort of thing. It's not really about textual criticism, but about how evil God is sort of thing. I can't remember the name. That's really bad. Bart Ehrman books. God's Problem. That's the one. Skeptic Philosophy says, Bible highlighted, do you think people speak in tongues when they're saved? Okay, interesting question. Do you suppress it when you look at a cloud and see shapes? I'm not sure what's happening there, but it looks like there's been a bit of a conversation with this, so I might just follow this until, if it gets a little bit silly, I'll sort of leave it and let these guys just chat. But sometimes these rabbit trails can be beneficial. Encounters with God and demons is not something that I can believe is all in my head. God answering prayers many years later that are miraculous. So Skeptic says, do you think people speak in tongues when they're saved? Okay. Bible Highlighter says, I believe the speaking in tongues has happened in the Bible. Does it happen today? I leave that in the realm to mystery more. Okay. Skeptic says, I ask because most don't think it is God speaking through them, yet 700 million Pentecostal and charismatic Christians think they are speaking in tongues as God does the work. I thought it also. Okay. And so I guess the thing is, when you're talking about personal experiences and things like that, that is a different type of, looking. It's different than looking at the material things and saying, okay, well, this simple cell is complex. It's got the flagellum and all these type of things in it that had to have been created. It's got gears in it. It's not simple. It's like a robot, but it's like the city of New York. That's how I like to describe it. So how could 700 million people convince themselves that something is happening to them, that it is just them doing it? Hyperskeptic. Are you hyperskeptic of Zeus? Okay. So I guess maybe he's talking to me about that, hyperskeptic, but we'll keep going through. There is also evidence for the Bible also you have the most to lose by not believing. It's like having insurance on your car or your house. You have the most to lose by not believing. It is like having insurance on your house. There are many evidences for the Bible too, from medical to science and more. So Skeptic says, Bible highlighted, do you read the Quran and pray to the north also, just as insurance? Bible highlighter says, no, I'm a Christian. The other religions are knockoffs and fakes and contradict the Bible. Christians are the most persecuted, and the Bible and Jesus upset people when it is brought up. And he says, Bible highlighter says, Skeptic, Philo, I am here to convince you. Only God can do that. If you want to believe the truth, truth will be found if you desire it. Skeptic says, being afraid of death and believing a comforting thing should not be mistaken with the truth. If that was the goal, we would all believe. To believe is the easy way. Most people don't seek truth. That's what I've found. Like even in politics, people want to believe what's fake and what's phony. They want to believe the wrestling is real. Skeptic philosophy says, ask forgiveness and get it. No real death takes all your pain. It sounds amazing. Do you mean to say that you are not here to convince me? I think he was quoting Philo, that he said that. Everyday Man of God Ministry says, being born again does not exempt you from pain and struggle here on earth. Skeptic says, if no God is, then no God convinces. We convince ourselves. The more desperate we are, the more prone to convincing ourselves we are. Okay, I'm sure that can happen. People can be in dire. I've heard of people being in dire straits and they've prayed and had a vision of Vishnu and all sorts of things, and that can happen. In a sense where it's an imaginary thing. They're under pressure, but I don't believe that has happened to me. This is why conversion does not happen in a science room, but during a teary altar call for broken people. It's not a logical call. This is an emotional call. Not all conversions happen at a teary altar call. Some conversions happen when people are trying to debunk Christianity. They look at all the facts and go, actually, there's a whole bunch of facts here. I've heard of people becoming Christians after they've won a gold medal at the Olympics. On their way home, they were like, is this it? Is it, I've trained and done everything up to this point. Is this what life's about? Why, and that they're looking logically at the fruitlessness of life with, it's got no purpose, no meaning, just a medal, and they put their faith in God, who they already know about, but they've been suppressing. Skeptic says, Everyday Man of God Ministries, no, but it does help you settle the idea that all will be okay and that you need not do anything to make it okay, that God will do it. Everyday Man of God Ministry says, the fact we have faith in where we will be does not eliminate sadness, pain, and suffering. I get what you're saying, because I have met professing Christians who seem to be robots. And, I know some people who, they don't know any theology. They actually say, hey, since I've become a Christian, God gave me a good job and I got a car and a wife. And that's their story. It's like, are they really saved? I don't know. But, thankfully God has made it very easy to get saved. I mean, to believe is a very easy step. But, does it line up with the Bible and logic? And that's where, the Bible does talk about, make your calling and election sure. It talks about, looking at these things, making sure, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. and I mean, that's probably more so like working it out in a sense. But that the older, probably erroneous way of looking at it, like working it out, figuring it out like a math problem. I mean, the Bible does talk about to be wise in your ways and to look well into your goings, and the Bereans, examine the scriptures daily. And so, yeah. Everyday Man in God Ministry says the fact that we have faith in where we will be does not eliminate sadness. Sorry, I just read that. Bible Highlight says, meant to say I am not here to convince the skeptic because I believe it's God's job. And he had to step out. Skeptic says, even your Olympic medalist conversion, it was for emotional reasons. They are not satisfied with a lack of purpose. This does not make a logical conversion, but an emotional, empty one. Well, I guess the thing is, like, the way that I got saved, I had 30 guys who were going to murder me. I bashed a drug dealer, bashed the wrong person, stole his drugs. And so they came to my house and smashed my whole house up, smashed every window in the house, trying to get into the house to get me. And I had an axe and I was swinging it at anyone who tried to climb in the windows. And it was a wild scene. And so the police came and got rid of all those guys. And I got to the point where I was sleeping in my bed. I got all the windows fixed. I'm sleeping in my bed with the axe. And I'm just there, like, waiting for these guys to come around. Any noise, I'm looking out the window, and I prayed, and my whole room filled with a big, bright, white light. And the Holy Spirit came into my life, and I've never been the same. And so I used to, so I've got that type of conversion story. And it was, I guess, like a Paul road to Damascus type of thing. But the thing is, there is also the concept of you're kicking against the pricks, you're kicking against the goads. There's been a prodding, and I became interested in Christianity. I actually read what was it, Lord Liar Lunatic, one by McDowell, I think it was. Read through that, saw the logic of it. It was like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, he was either Lord, he was a liar, or he was a lunatic. I know, skeptics and atheists have a pushback against that, but I was an atheist. I was a skeptic. I started pushing back against what I thought and knew, and it wasn't until that experience I was like, yeah, God is real. God, He's made Himself real to me. And then I started looking at the Bible and looking at logic and looking at things. Now, if I'd looked at the Bible, like I remember when I went to a church and I heard the pastor say that the earth was only 6,000 years old. And I thought, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I can't believe he just said that. And then I started telling other people, and they said, oh, no, there's a whole movement like the creation science. And they gave me all these answers in Genesis stuff. This is back in the 90s. And I read into it, like, because I was just following, like, okay, I've had this experience, but I would have just said something that wasn't, if it wasn't true, I would have said it. And I would still do that today. Like, I'm not here to please any parent or any pastor or any denomination or any leader. I'm here to just search for truth. And the more I've searched for truth, the more I've found answers, and those answers are in the Bible. And to the point where I've found, like, way too many answers. I'm like, yeah, the evidence is so overwhelming that I can't deny it. Like, even if I was to tomorrow, and I've met Christians who have, like, backslidden, they're not living for God. They're out there doing their stuff. And, they don't have anything to gain by saying it, but they are like, hey, look, I'm being 100% honest. Christianity is absolutely 100% true, but I'm just not living it. I'm a hypocrite, And I'm like, okay, well, at least you're honest. I've met heaps of people like that. And they've looked logically at Christianity, and they know it's true, but they don't want to live it. And so that can happen as well. So to me, I've had an experience, like, say, the Apostle Paul, And then I'm figuring it out. And then the more that I figured out, the more truth was revealed. I was like, hang on, yeah, that there is a designer in all this. We don't just come from river slime. We're not just, related to some monkey. So it doesn't matter if I just act like a monkey. Hey, we're not just atheists. So it doesn't matter if I just shoot you in the face or give you a sandwich. It's just the same thing. Nothing matters, because that's how I was living my life. That there is purpose. There is, scripture. There is the Bible to guide us, and there is logic in there. And so that's where I came to. And so, but I am also very skeptical of people's conversion experiences, because I know lots of fake people who have these experiences. And the thing is too, someone can have a genuine experience as well, but become fake. I've seen that where it's undeniable something has happened, but then it doesn't mean they're going to continue on in that. They could continue on for a year and then they're like, oh, I'm doing whatever I want. And so, but they can do whatever they want and become a false prophet, false teacher. So then they have this testimony that probably was real, but then they've morphed into something else. So Skeptic says, if you got it for purpose, it gave you purpose and you wanted purpose. This is not logic. This is pragmatic to satisfy your desire, not logic. Yeah, but like, initially, if I've had, and so the thing is, it's hard to explain an experience. And when I hear other people's experiences, naturally I'm skeptical of them. When I hear testimonies of someone raised from the dead in Nigeria or whatever, I'm straight away like, yeah, it's a Nigerian scam or whatever. But when it comes to my own life, like I've seen lots and lots and lots of things happen. But I understand that most people probably would have that same, hair stand on the back of their neck and go, this is rubbish. This is just him in his own hallucination sort of thing. And so, but the thing is, like, what have I, like, okay, it gave me purpose, but it's like, there are plenty of things that can give me purpose that would be way better than, way better in a worldly, temporal sense than Christianity. Like, I could do lots and lots of other things that would give me, satisfaction, give me a purpose, give me a role, give me whatever, where the whole, this isn't like, I've got a purpose, I've got a reason to live now. This is more so, I've had an experience, and the more that I've studied what happened to me, the more that I've realized that this experience, because I didn't even know about the story of like Paul or anything. And then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, this happened to Paul in the Bible. This exact same type of thing. Saw a light, was completely changed from that moment on. And so I'm reading through this going, he met the same God I did. So Everyday Man of God Ministry says faith and logic can and does intersect when you study. And when you study, when lost, when you travel roads to nowhere and you find the only path is one. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I mean, like, say, like for the moment, like I know Skeptic had to take off. He said, great talk, take care. But yeah, that what you're just saying there, I think skeptics look at say someone like me and say, okay, well you've had this experience because you really deep down wanted this experience, and then you're just backing it up with, no matter what, I'm going to find an answer to it, sort of thing. Like what Bart Ehrman says. It's like, oh, you've got a contradiction here. Yeah, sure. Anyone can come up with anything to match this contradiction, to harmonize this contradiction. But when you look at these so-called contradictions, they're really easily harmonized. Like if you had them in a Hollywood story or a Netflix series or whatever, it would just be, a plot twist or you're saving the best information for last, sort of thing, or it's not just a robotic like data sheet. And as I was explaining in the last video, the whole thing of catharsis, when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, that's the best story. That is so good in the scriptures. And it doesn't say, hey, before Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, he did this and did that. No, it saves it all to last. So some of these stories are built like that. That when the authors wrote it, they wrote it in a sense where they were building up to something. And then they let that information, they let the cat out of the bag, and it's like, wow, that's what really happened. And people get that same type of emotion out of that. So you can tell these guys are being preachers, because they can build things up and tell the story and keep all the information hidden, then reveal it at the end. And it's a big, like, wow, that's what happened. And but just coming back to what I was saying, at the end of the day, if someone can prove to me that Christianity is wrong, I will run with that. And that's why I'm going through all these skeptic claims, and Ehrman, and I'm just listening to them, confronting them, and saying, okay, is it logical what you said here, and is this a strong argument? Basically, with Ehrman, it just comes down to people in the Middle East were illiterate; they were dummies, so they could never have written this. Only a few could have, and probably in Rome, they probably wrote this. And, it's just absurd, really. His arguments are just like the disciples were dummies. Okay. And then, contradictions in the Bible, Judas contradiction, no contradiction whatsoever. The women at the tomb, no contradiction. Resurrection appearances, no contradiction. But then he's gravitating to the critical text position, which is the worst, most skeptical, based upon, the teachings of Jesuits and Unitarians and unbelievers, atheists. And it's like the worst sort of thing you can believe. And he's gravitating toward that. So, of course, it's got a heap of problems in it. If he was convincing, I would jump on board, but he's just there's just nothing convincing about this. And so I don't think that I am being a person who is throwing my brains out, or just like why would I do this? Why would I let Bart Ehrman say everything and go through it and meticulously go through his arguments and look up the claims and listen to what he's got to say? Because if what he was saying was actually true, what these skeptics were saying was true, I would just be constantly damning myself every time I'm in public on YouTube. It's like, hey, look, I guess it's like being a flat earther or something, and I'm always just showing evidence for a globe. And I'm just showing it constantly, showing, and then just at the end saying, no, flat Earth is true. I'm providing some pretty good information to show why his arguments are not sound, to show precedents of how Bart Ehrman loves to sensationalize things. Like, we've talked about Codex Bezer with the reading in Mark 1:41, where he gets angry, this type of thing. And how he puffs that right up and says it's a huge issue, where it's just nothing. Most even critical text people don't even care about that. And so he wants to sensationalize things. That's just what he does. Over the years, I've just seen him do that. I think he learned that from his exposure of the Da Vinci Code, which he did. I think he actually learnt from Dan Brown that he could make a living, a good, proper living off being a religious skeptic and creating doubt and creating mystery around all these things. And there's so many religious people in the world that they'll lap it up, but there's so many skeptics in the world, they'll lap it up too. So there's a huge audience there. So there was a need and he filled it. and now he's the guru, but that doesn't mean what he's saying is true and factual. And I think even Jonathan here, he's pointing out lots of holes in Bart Ehrman's position, and many other people have done it. There's so much information about Bart Ehrman and the rubbish that he's saying online that I don't know why people think that he is the guru. I guess because they're sucked in to the whole critical text argument. But anyway, we'll continue on. Now, I do have to leave my house in exactly 1 hour. So that gives me a bit of a time restraint. Maybe I can go for another 20 minutes. So that would mean this stream went for 3 hours. I'll go for another 20 minutes and then I'll pull the pin. And then I've got to get ready to go out for an Easter lunch. And so that's going to be awesome. So I will continue. So I think we'll get probably maybe a little bit through Bart Ehrman stuff.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm going to pull you off the stage. I'm going to bring Dr. Ehrman back on. Dr. Ehrman, did you have a second slide presentation you needed or anything, or did you?
I don't think I'll do that. No, I think I'll just try and do it orally.
Okay. All right. And I will give you the complete floor. And as soon as you start, I'll give you, like at the 10-minute mark, again, I'll kind of give an indicator similar to what I did Jonathan. And then that'll give you time to wrap up your last statements. And then we'll go straight into the cross-examination.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. This is not going to be very elegant as a rebuttal, in part because I'm not sure what Jonathan is arguing. And so that's why I'm looking forward to the cross-examination. I didn't hear what evidence he had that Jesus was raised from the dead. His argument seems to be that if it was a hoax, Roman authorities would have tried to expose it. And so since they didn't try to expose it, I think he's saying, therefore, it was not a hoax. And I think he's saying, therefore, it must have happened. And they must have known it happened. So I don't really quite understand that argument. I think he's saying that Pontius Pilate believed Jesus was raised from the dead, and that Tiberius believed he was raised from the dead, and that Plutarch and Livy and Cicero believed he was raised from the dead. If they believed he was raised from the dead, I'm sorry, I just don't understand. None of these authors mentions Jesus. And why would you think they became Christians? Or is it that you think they thought they really believed Jesus was raised from the dead, but decided that he wasn't the Son of God because it wasn't a hoax? I mean, I generally do not understand the argument. And so I am looking forward to the
So sorry about that. My mouse has like a whole bunch of buttons on the side, and I clicked one, and I was on the StreamYard page, and it took me back. So anyway, I've just got to set this up again. Screen share entire screen. There we go. Sorry about that. My fault. This is the mouse here. Oops, I just pressed another button, and it's sort of like a gaming mouse, and it's got these two buttons on the side, and if you press one, the page goes back, and so I've got to be really careful with that. So anyway, I'll rewind it a tiny bit.
And so I am looking forward to the cross-examination. There are several things that I will say. The big point, I think, is that there was no counter narrative given by these people. But at the same time, he said there was a counter narrative. Because by the time you get anybody actually talking about the event with Celsus, he does give a counter narrative. He says that these women were hysterical, that they didn't really see Jesus. So that is a counter narrative. Celsus is writing about the year 170. These other authors, I'll be interested in asking him why he thinks that Livy or Cicero would have been writing about it, for one reason, and why he thinks Plutarch would have been writing about it for another. I think what he's assuming is that Christianity was taking over the empire by leaps and bounds, and that it had become such an enormous movement that the Roman authorities would have been quite perplexed by it and worried about it, and the philosophers would have been writing about it. So I'll be interested in knowing what he thinks about the spread of Christianity at the time that these people were writing. What evidence is there that there was widespread knowledge of it, for example? I was particularly taken by his appeal to the Pilate Gospels, where he referred to writings allegedly by Pontius Pilate to Tiberius that are not found in the New Testament, that are alluded to by Justin, martyr, in the year 115, by Tertullian around the year 200. And he thinks that Pilate actually did have these communications, and that based on writings in these non-canonical Christian texts about Pilate. These are often called the Pilate Gospels. They're very interesting books. If you don't know about them, this account here is called the Other Gospels. This is a translation, introduction translation to the other Gospels outside the New Testament, including the Gospels that feature Pontius Pilate, that my colleague Zlatko Plesha and I translated, and we produced this volume. If you want to read these Pilate Gospels, I encourage you to do so. They are very interesting. You read those and tell me if you think that they're historical. Is there any historical basis for Pilate writing Tiberius, for example, and being so upset because now he realizes that he killed the Son of God and the Roman Empire might be in trouble here, and that Tiberius, the Emperor Tiberius, is very upset, and so he sends the troops to Pilate in order to arrest him, and because he has killed the Son of God, he's going to have Pilate executed, and they execute Pilate, but he converts to Christianity. He becomes a believer in Jesus, and so he's taken up to heaven. His head is chopped off, and an angel comes down and takes Pilate's head up to heaven. Okay, so you can find that in these Pilate Gospels. I'm a little surprised that Jonathan is taking these as historical accounts.
I don't know if Jonathan was taking those as historical accounts. He's definitely taking the Gospels as historical accounts. So let's look at Pontius Pilate. Gospels. Okay, so I'll just go to the Wikipedia page here. Pontius Pilate. Okay, so ancient sources such as Josephus, Philo, and the Gospel of Luke. So obviously, Christians are following the narratives of the scriptures to get these, not other Gospels that mention Pontius Pilate. But I just want to see what age these are coming from. So Pilate is also mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, Epistle to Timothy. Ignatius of Antioch mentions him, so he's mentioned quite frequently. Maybe I can look at what would you call it? Not Gnostic, but pseudo. How would you spell that? Pseudo. Pseudo. There we go. Okay, so there's no pseudo there. Maybe by typing gospel. Okay, so because the Gospels portray Pilate as reluctant to execute Jesus, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church believes that Pilate became a Christian. Okay, so it's Ethiopic Orthodox Church. A belief which was also historically held by the Coptic Church. So that's where it's like, okay, we've got to find out this type of narrative. So maybe I can look for the word conversion. Okay, yeah, the apocryphal, that's the word that I was looking for, apocryphal. 7 of the Pilate texts mention Pilate's fate after the crucifixion. In 3, he becomes a very positive figure, while in 4, he is presented as diabolically evil. A 5th century Syriac version of the Acts of Pilate explains Pilate's conversion. 5th century Syriac version. As occurring after he has blamed the Jews for the death of Jesus in front of Tiberius prior to his execution. Pilate prays to God and converts, therefore becoming a Christian martyr. In the Greek, and so that's the thing, in some of these groups that people align themselves with, they're like, okay, I'm part of the Syriac church or the Catholic church, whatever, and you have to believe these type of strange stories here. So then we have in Greek, 5th century, Pilate is arrested for the crime of executing Jesus, although he has since converted to be a follower of Christ. His beheading is accompanied by a voice from heaven calling him blessed and saying he will be with Jesus at the second coming. So then we have the preserved in Arabic, Coptic, and Ge'ez, which is the Ethiopian language, says that Jesus was crucified by Herod, whereas Pilate was a true believer in Christ who was martyred for his faith. And so these all seem to be after the 5th century. So we have this other one dated to the 5th to 7th century. And we have another one, perhaps originally 6th century, but recorded in 1300. We have another one, 8th century. So these are in no way related to the gospel. So to me, I think Bart Ehrman is actually doing this as a bit of a, I wonder if Jonathan's going to pull him up on this, because this is quite ridiculous. It's like saying, what is it like saying? People talking about the personal life of Martin Luther, in nowadays when they don't know, where there's no historical precedent for it. Obviously, you would most likely believe people who knew Luther, lived with him, and said things that if they had been false, people would have rebuked them and said, no, that's not exactly what happened. I was there. I heard that conversation, that type of thing. And so you can't do that, 500, 1300, years later. So, this, okay, so it does mention Bart Ehrman here. So apocryphal text, there we go. Due to his role in Judas's trial, Pilate became an important figure in both pagan and Christian propaganda in late antiquity. Perhaps the earliest apocryphal texts attributed to Pilate are denunciations of Christianity and of Jesus that claim to be Pilate's report on the crucifixion. According to Eusebius, these texts were distributed during the persecution of Christians conducted by the Emperor Maximianus II, reigned 308 to 313. None of these texts survive. Okay, so Eusebius said that there were this was some stuff that was circulating around that time. So we're looking at around 300 to 315 sort of thing. None of these texts survive, but Tiber Grohl argues that their contents can be reconstructed from Christian apologetic texts. Positive traditions about Pilate were frequent in much of early Christianity, particularly in Egypt and Ethiopia, where negative traditions predominate in Western and Byzantine Christianity. Additionally, earlier Christian traditions portray Pilate more positively than later ones. A change which Anne Rowe suggests reflect the fact that following the legalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire by the Edict of Milan in 312, it was no longer necessary to deflect criticism of Pilate and by extension of the Roman Empire for his role in Jesus' crucifixion onto the Jews. Bart Ehrman, on the other hand, argues that the tendency of the early church to exonerate Pilate and blame the Jews prior to this time reflects and increasing anti-Judaism among early Christians. And so that is Ehrman 2003. So that's before misquoting Jesus, which is interesting. The earliest attestation of a positive tradition about Pilate comes from the late 1st, early 2nd century Christian author Tertullian, who claims to have seen Pilate report to Tiberius, states Pilate had become already a Christian in his conscience. Okay. An earlier reference to Pilate's records of Jesus' trial is given by the Christian apologist Justin Martyr around 160. Tiber Grull believes that this could be a reference to Pilate's actual records. But other scholars argue that Justin has simply invented the records as a source on the assumption that they existed without ever having verified their existence. So that's interesting, because by like 160, Christians have been very persecuted. It's interesting. I guess at first I was like, 5th century, because I'm just reading this section here from Pilate's death in the Apocrypha, searching for that. Then we have New Testament Apocrypha, so I guess I'll have to go through that. So, okay, at first I just assumed that they were after the 5th century, but it does seem like there were these stories. But I don't think that Jonathan has turned around and just said, yeah, well, Pilate got saved. You know what I mean? I don't think he said that. I haven't heard that anywhere. If he had said that, I would know, because we're examining every word that's being said. And so I will let Bart talk. I'm going to go in a couple of minutes, but I'll let Bart just continue, and we'll try and finish the thought.
I've done a lot of research on them. There's not a lot of research done on them because scholars don't take them as historical. I don't know of anybody who thinks that these are describing things that happened.
So he's saying, I don't know anyone, but he's sort of accusing Jonathan of claiming this. So I don't understand that. Okay, but maybe in some of Jonathan's sources, he might have said, okay, well, Justin Martyr said this, and because he did say, Justin Martyr said this, and other people said that, Eusebius said this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he has made the claim that Pilate became a Christian and all the rest of it, and he believes all those narratives. It's just that things are being talked about, and so I guess this will probably be a major theme because it is a major accusation in the next video. And I will go through and look at the Pontius Pilate issues, and I might even see if I can get the audio book of what Bart Ehrman held up, and I might be able to read it this week so I can be a bit prepared for next week. Bible Highlighter says the Academy makes agnostics and atheists. Yes, that's true. I'll let Bart just talk for a little bit longer, and we'll see if he finishes that thing and goes on to something else, but I'm about to leave.
And so I'm interested in Jonathan saying some more about that. And so I think that will be interesting. I was
okay, so he's moving on to something else. So I'll just put that down. We are at the 1:17:11 mark, and so we've got about an hour and 20 minutes to go in examining this. We're nearly halfway through, so I guess if this is part 4, we're going to probably have 8 parts to it. And when you get into Q&A, that can be a big thing because it can go any direction. And sometimes I'll just say they'll ask a question that's not even related. But so that book that Bart Ehrman had, I might grab the audio of that and read through it and see exactly what he's saying. And then when we jump back and we'll listen to what Jonathan has to say about it, no doubt Jonathan's probably read that book. He's a smart guy. He's well versed in all this. And so, but yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. I'm enjoying going through all this. And obviously, Bart Ehrman has jumped into atheist, agnostic world, and that involves apocryphal texts, legends, myths, and a whole bunch of stuff that usually we can't be bothered with. But it's like, okay, well, he's making these claims, and so if we are going to rebut those claims, or we're going to educate ourselves on at least what's being said here, we have to know them. And so I will jump both feet into the whole Pontius Pilate thing, and we will look at that. And it'd be interesting to see what Jonathan says about this sort of accusation that Bart Ehrman's never heard of anyone who believes these fantastical things, but apparently Jonathan's making these claims. And I was like, I don't think he is. But anyway, we'll see next time. So Bible Highlight says Bart is simply a product of it. Yes, a predictable product of the unbelieving academy. So, okay, guys, thanks for joining us. Appreciate all the comments and everything like that. And have a great Easter. I'm about to head out to have a bit of an Easter lunch with family, and that's going to be awesome. And yeah, enjoy yourself, enjoy your weekend, and we will see you very soon.